Please rise and stand with me as we say the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Councilmember Don Check.
Here.
Councilmember Swartz.
Here.
Councilmember Ward.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Ham.
Here.
And Mayor Brown is absent but will be here later. First item on the agenda is a report from the Assistant City Manager concerning the city's fiscal year 2017-18 third quarter financial report. Yeah, try it.
Good evening, council members. I'm Judy Vincent, the deputy. What is my title? Deputy Director of Administrative Services, and I'll be doing a brief report on our third quarter financial review before we jump into the budget. Every quarter, we like to give council an overview of where we're at. So let me do this quickly so that we can move on. And here we go again with my. So general fund revenues at March 31st, so this is through 9 months of the fiscal year. You can see at the bottom here our total revenues actual are $42.9 million compared to $67.2 million budget, so that's at about 64% of our budget. And if you look at the total revenues, this is just a comparison over the last 3 years, so you can see 17-18, which I just mentioned, is circled there, and we're at 64%. In the last couple years, we've been right around that, either 63% a couple years ago and 62% of our total revenue. So we're right where we anticipate to be at this time of the year. And one of the reasons, even though we're 9 months through the year, and that's not 75%, if you'll all remember, property taxes come in December and April, so we haven't received our second share of property taxes this fiscal year. So here we are, we're talking about property taxes here. As you can see, there's been continued growth in this, and at March 31 of 2018, we're seeing $21.2 million. That's where we're at now. We do expect to meet the budget this year for property taxes. And then sales tax, our other major driver of our revenue. Here's a 3-year history of sales tax. And one of the things, and we talked about this a little bit in our long-term financial plan, that sales taxes are tending to flatten out somewhat. While we do expect higher than this, obviously, for the fiscal year because of some timing differences, we are seeing a flattening of sales tax over time. And what's causing that is that there's been less brick and mortar sales at stores that are brick and mortar stores is the term that they often use, which is the stores that you walk into, as opposed to online sales. And the online sales, we don't receive as much revenue from those as we do from the brick and mortar stores. So if someone goes on, say, Target online and purchases as opposed to going to our Target store, we're not going to see that sales tax revenue here. And then if we look at general fund expenditures for the third quarter, the total expenditures of $47.5 million almost is about 63% of our total budget for this fiscal year, which is, again, about right where we are almost every year at this time, about 63% of our spending for our total expenditures. And if you look at our operating position, so after the mid-year adjustments that were made, about a month or two ago, council made some mid-year adjustments. Those have been added in. So right now we have about $1 million as our operating position. And remember, this is your ongoing revenues over your ongoing expenses. And so we had last year's budget was about $1.2 million. So we're right about at the same point we were at the budget in terms of our operating position. And so that's the third quarter report. The action that we're asking is just for council to receive and file this report. And I can answer any questions on the third quarter if you have those.
No, I just have one comment. In addition to your comments about the internet, it's also the commercial development that has been going on in the city has pretty much tapped out because we have the TJ Maxx Center that's now up and running, and the outlet malls has started throwing sales tax revenue our way. So there's no big escalations in the future.
Yes, so in the budget I have a sales tax chart, and we'll talk about that there, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll move to accept the third quarterly report.
Second, motion by Schwartz, second by Hamel, all in favor? Aye. Passes 4-0-1.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is a public hearing and workshop concerning the City of San Clemente proposed budget for fiscal year 2018-2019.
Mayor Pro Tem Ham, can we do the cards first?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I have no.
there you
Anybody
go.
else have any issue with that before? Okay. So we're going to open up to the public before we do that. I was just working that out with Joanne. Actually.
Oh, is that what that?
That literally was what it was. So, with that, we'll open the public hearing, and Carter,
We're going to take cards
Mudge.
at the end.
following Carter Mudge, will be pickleball, Manny Ramiro, and then Derek Greer. So if you could each approach the dais, you'll have 3 minutes to speak, and you'll have lovely colors in front of you to demonstrate when your time is up. Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members and Mayor Pro Tem Ham. My name is Carter Mudge. I am a former lifeguard here for 10 years. I am currently on the San Clemente Educational Foundation and the San Clemente Lifeguard and Junior Lifeguard Foundation. I have 2 sons who are seasonal lifeguards. I put myself through law school being a recurrent lifeguard, so it's recurrent lifeguards in the Marine Safety Department are something that's near and dear to my heart. It's come to my attention that there's 2 issues that I'm not sure have been put before you in terms of your budget. One is pay raises for recurrent lifeguards. These guys in the towers are your front line to your tourists. They're highly trained, aggressive individuals who provide immediate response to public need in times of emergency, accident, or individual trespass of public rights. They are the leading people that you have meeting visitors from out of town. They haven't gotten a cost of living increase in 2 years, even though the general employees have gotten 2 3.1% increases. You're balancing your budget on the backs of voiceless kids and young adults, and what you're talking about is something like 60 cents an hour for a $20 an hour lifeguard. I'd ask that you revisit this in your budget and make an allowance to pay these guys and these young men and women what they're worth. And I took a look at your agenda items for last month. You authorized increases in legal budgets by $421,000. You can't carve out 6.1% raises for hourly people in the summer. I think you should do that. Second item is the personal watercraft. That's the jet ski. That's the only way that the lifeguards have to effectively patrol the water when we have, as you know, increased numbers of sharks and things like that. So the lifeguard department came to the Lifeguard and Junior Lifeguard Foundation last week and asked for $6,500. And this is money that we authorize that's coming out of programs and facilities that we should be providing to the junior lifeguards. The city should be funding its own equipment, it should be funding its own vehicles, and for them to come to us, a volunteer organization that raises money from the community and ask for $6,500 to fund their half of the personal watercraft is something that I'd ask you to reconsider and put that in your budget as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mudge. Manny Romero, and then Derek Greer.
Hi, my name is Manny Romero. I'm the ambassador for USA Pickleball Association here in San Clemente. And I've been working with a lot of different groups, the Boys and Girls Club here. I've been, Wednesday I'm putting on a demonstration for our senior center here. Introduce the game of pickleball. That's my job, is to promote the game of pickleball throughout San Clemente. I'm also working with another group that works with Parkinson's, a group with Parkinson's. They've now realized that it does help because of the eye-hand coordination, the stimulation to the brain. Once again, when I put this demonstration on for the senior center on Wednesday, that big question is going to come up: where can we play? We don't have any pickleball courts here in San Clemente. It doesn't take a lot to put them up. We have several tennis courts here in the city that are not being used. I mean, I drive by them every day constantly. Pickleball is a sport that's exploding. It's going to take off, and we can't stop it. And every city from here to Huntington Beach all the way to Carlsbad, San Diego has pickleball courts. And we seem to be the only city that has not made the effort to do that. It doesn't take a lot. 4 pickleball courts will fit on 1 tennis court. And I know there are so many tennis courts in the city that are not being utilized for tennis. And it doesn't take a lot to put them together. We can use ghost lines, which is basically you can put lines on a tennis court that will not keep you from playing tennis, use portable nets, but it'd be nice to have dedicated courts for the game to start promoting in this town. Once again, not asking a lot, a little help, see if we can get something going. Parkinson's group, same thing. I'd love to help them. I want to work with them, but once again, I have that same battle is I have nowhere to put them. I have nowhere to take them and say, hey, we're going to work with you, but we have nowhere in town to go. The closest place to us right now is San Juan Capistrano. And, I'm an avid player. I play 4 days a week, and I can't even play in my own town. All I ask is for a little bit of help. I know there's a lot of tennis courts out there that are vacant. People are not being used. The sport is growing. I mean, I work at the high school. Our high school kids are now playing it for PE. All the high school kids are playing it. All the middle school kids are playing it. And it's just a matter of time before it gets to the point where people are going to start asking, where do we play? So I'm coming to you for a little help. It's not a big budget item. It's not going to take a lot to get pickleball courts together. So once again, a little help would be great. At least consider something. There's a lot of good that can come out of pickleball. It's not a sport that you don't have to be an athlete to play. If you have any kind of coordination, if you're old, young, we have people that are 85-year-old that play in our club. And once again, it's good. Body in motion stays in motion. So everybody benefits from this. And it's also a sport that families can play together. I've seen mom and dads and their kids out there playing, and they love it. So once again, thank you for your time.
Thank you. And our last speaker is Derek Greer. Does anybody else have a card they'd like to turn in before we close oral communications? Okay.
All right. Good afternoon, City Council members. I did do a virtual slide here. I don't know if you guys have that. Yep, there it is. Awesome. I'm guessing I just do the arrow over here. All right. Great. So most of you are obviously already aware. My name is, again, Derek Greer. I'm a board member for the Downtown Business Association. I am a business owner here in the downtown area in the T-zone. I'm a financial planner, and I'm here to kind of talk to you a little bit about the budget allocation for the Downtown Business Association. So just real quick, as you guys know, we do a couple main events per year, which we partner with you guys on, and we appreciate that partnership. And I'm here today to just further that partnership and let it be known that what we do for the city and how we want to continue serving the city and its residents, and most importantly, the downtown business owners. So this is our car show. You guys are all probably very familiar with that. I'm going to jump through these very quick. I didn't realize I only had 3 minutes, so I'm going to go fast. Santa's Village by the Sea, Del Mar Glitz. Obviously, that's one that I'm sure you guys are all aware of as well. And then the monthly Village Art Fair. And this is just a list of a few things that we do for the DBA members. So jumping ahead, anybody can look at that in more detail if they'd like. I got a little crazy with the slides here, so again, didn't realize I had 3 minutes. So I'm going to skip past a couple of these. This is a quick graph of the budget decreases that the DBA has seen over the last couple of years. And I'll be the first to say that I'm a relatively new board member, and it's been brought to my attention that there has not been enough communication on behalf of the DBA to you guys on a regular basis. And hence why we've been getting decreased funding every year, yet still continuing to put on these events that get bigger and stronger and more popular every year. So I'm here today as a renewed commitment of the DBA as the finance chair to commit to you guys that we want to continue to be more transparent and to offer essentially a solution moving forward to continue these great events in the city of San Clemente. So again, this is a graph here. One of the most recent thing, just real quick, is the recent budget decrease that was proposed of 16.5%. And essentially where I'm going with this on this ask is that we at least are able to maintain what we received last year, which was in 2017, $31,400 some odd dollars. I have the numbers in here. So moving forward, these are just some numbers that you guys can dive into on the events as far as what the costs are versus the reimbursements. So I'm going to try to cram this in very quickly. So over the past 5 years, we have maintained our revenues, our expenses ballooned, and our city support has decreased. We'd like to point out that from 2015 to 2016 alone, our expenses increased by over $40,000. One of those reasons is because our events are becoming larger, more popular, and more costly. They've been run a lot on volunteerism, and moving forward, we need additional paid help. It has become too difficult to operate, entirely on that volunteerism. So, again, we renewed commitment to partner with you guys moving forward, and we appreciate the support that you've given us thus far. And thank you for your time.
Thanks, Derek. So if we have no other cards, we'll close oral communications, part one. Okay. Before we move on, we had a couple of cards at the beginning here that had some questions. James, are you prepared to speak to the Mr. Mudge's concerns about the lifeguards?
Yes, I can speak to those. The personal watercraft, that came to us this year as a budget replacement for $13,000. Originally, it's my understanding that personal watercraft was paid for with grant funds. And in the past, the city has looked as grant funds as being one-time funded, programs. So the personal watercraft wasn't placed in the vehicle replacement program. So over the past 5 years, or however many years the personal watercraft has been in service, we haven't been salting away money to pay for a new one. So this year, the lifeguards asked for one. Originally, it was turned down because it was a grant-funded program, and we thought it was over after the first time. I told finance staff, let's add it back in. This is something they need. It's part of their operations, and it's an important piece of equipment for them. So I asked finance, Eric specifically, to talk to Bill Humphreys and see if maybe the foundation could help us out this year and pay for half of it. We'll replace it, and then in the years going forward, we'll put it into the vehicle replacement program. So in 5 years, whenever this personal watercraft is due to be replaced, we'll have the money salted away and we'll be able to replace it on our own dime. So that's what happened with the personal watercraft. As far as the raises for the part-timers is concerned, yes, the current MOU that the city did a year and a half ago didn't take into account the part-timers. We have been talking about addressing that and coming forward with something in the next year for all the part-timers in general, not just the lifeguard part-timers. One thing to be aware of, as the employees received cost of living increases over the last MOU, while the part-timers got the full amount of the cost of living increase, the full-timers gave up a percentage for pension payback. And the part-timers didn't have to do that. So basically this year, it's my understanding, when the full-timers get this next COLA, basically will be about even with the part-timers for how much they received over those years when they received 3% every year, and the full-timers didn't actually get that because they're paying back part of their pension. So then in the future, next year, we'll come back to you with an idea of how we can fund all the part-timers with a cost of living increase.
When you say foundation, you're talking about the Lifeguard Association.
The lifeguard
employees.
The Lifeguard Foundation, the Junior Lifeguard Foundation that helps out with scholarships for the Junior Lifeguard program. They helped out with the drone.
And where does all that
city.
funding come from?
That comes, they do fundraisers and that sort of thing.
Okay.
Could I ask to see what a 3% raise for what they're called, I guess, recurrent lifeguards? Is that what they are, the part-timers in the summer? Could I just, because not during this meeting, but as a follow-up item? Because I don't know if we're talking about $3,000 or if we're talking about $300,000. I'm sure we're not $300,000.
We'll work that out for what it looks like for the lifeguards, and we'll bring you back something for what it'll look like for all the part-time employees. Because I don't want to elevate the lifeguards over the other part-time employees.
Okay, thank you.
Do we want to hear from BPR real quick about pickleball?
Absolutely. Samantha Thomas can speak to it.
Thanks, Samantha.
Good afternoon, Council. Samantha Thomas, Recreation Manager. So I'm actually really happy to announce that we, last week, maintenance met with a contractor to look at adding lines to pickleball at San Luis Rey Park. Through the BPR master plan, it was identified that that was a desire and a want and certainly a need within the community. Our first step is going to just to be adding lines to an existing tennis court. We plan to resurface the pickleball courts at San Luis, or the tennis courts at San Luis Rey in July, and part of that resurfacing will include additional lines for pickleball. The thought being that San Luis Rey has 4 courts already for tennis, and there's kind of one that's a little askew from the others as they line up. So that's going to be the one that we essentially pilot pickleball within our community. It's much more budget friendly to just add lines versus building completely new courts, and then we'll kind of go from there. Okay.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Building completely new courts, aren't we just talking about paint? If we're going to resurface them anyway?
No, you'd also have to get the netting. There's a couple other things that you have to kind of work into the setup as well. I do know that there are, as the resident mentioned, there's several other cities. Newport Beach just opened a beautiful pickleball facility up. So we have agencies we can compare to and get some costs on pretty quickly as well.
How many courts did it take for a tournament to be held? Wasn't it 6?
I believe it's 6 or 8, yeah. So that would be 2 tennis courts, I believe.
8? Okay. So what would be the harm in repainting two of the courts if we have 4?
We can certainly look into it, yeah.
So that we actually could hold something here in San Clemente. I'd rather see two done for a trial.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to have a chance to talk about it coming up pretty soon. So
Yes, the pickleball, the lines are going to go to BPR Commission in June to their meeting, and it'll come to council for review. It's a master plan amendment for that site specifically.
Could you include in that, since Kathy brought it up, could you include the cost for striping the second
Sure.
tennis court, as well as possibly installing the proper netting on the one that's that's offset, that's out of the way, to convert that to a full-time pickleball court
Sure.
for 4 courts, and then the other one could be used for tournaments and so on and afterwards. So
Okay.
at least give us that option.
Okay, yeah, you bet. Okay.
good recommendation. Thank you, Samantha. And then I'd just like to thank Mr. Greer for coming out. I'm going to be supporting his request for the DBA this year, so I'm sure we'll talk more in depth about that when it comes forward. But thank you, everybody who spoke this evening, and we will have oral communications part 2 still at the end. So if anybody wants to speak at the end, there'll be that opportunity as well. Thanks. Judy?
So I'm going to do a brief introduction and then pass it off to Judy. So as we begin the budget workshop for fiscal year 2018-19, we have one step, which is tonight, the workshop and the public hearing, and then we'll be coming back on June 12th for the budget adoption. If you remember, we had our LTFP, long-term financial plan, in March that kind of set the stage for us going into the budget process for this year, as it always does. Okay, so the budget focus. So I thought it was important to kind of share with the council our budget focus / themes from previous fiscal years. So for 2018-19, we're looking at the city is focused on the reallocation of budget and services to meet priorities. That's kind of the theme that we're looking at this year. But if you look at the last 2 years, so going back to 16-17, we took the position of investing in today to protect tomorrow. And then in 17-18, we indicated as we approach future years, it is essential that the city do more with less. So our message has been consistent, and while we've been investing in infrastructure, specifically parks, as we started in 16-17, we're committed to that. But one thing I think you can ask any individual in the city, we're doing more with less in terms of less service time, less staff, and so we're really trying to focus on the priorities with regards to the city's attention. Key themes. So obviously it's always going to be a key theme to maintain our strong financial foundation as it relates to our AAA credit rating, and the long-term financial plan is a key element to maintaining that strong financial foundation. As I talked about on the previous slide, we're going to be looking at reallocating budget / services to meet priorities. You'll see in your budget presentation how we look at reallocating services within public safety. And when we say public safety, one of the things you'll notice in the presentation is we're using that as an all-encompassing. It's Orange County Sheriff's Department, it's the Orange County Fire Authority, it's code enforcement, and it's marine safety when we look at public safety. Also a theme in this year's budget, we're going to be seeking services to mitigate homeless issues through partnerships that seek solutions. So later on in our presentation, you'll hear more on that. And then again, continuing to invest in the future of San Clemente. So we have the City Hall remodel. We have the beginning stages of the implementation of the Beaches Park and Recreation Master Plan. And as we set forth in the 2016 LTFP, we have our Information Technology Strategic Plan that we're already starting to see the benefits of that investment in the IT infrastructure. So, while we have a lot of challenges in front of us, one of the things, and this was said in James's narrative in the city budget, we have a lot to be proud of what we've accomplished for the city in terms of enduring the long-term success. So tonight you're going to have an overview of the budget. We're going to have department budget highlights. We're going to look at the CIP program. We're going to deliberate on 2 city council decision packages. We've already opened up the public hearing. We'll open it up again for second comments later on, and then we'll address any comments or questions that the council may have. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Judy, our Deputy Administrative Services Director, who will begin the budget overview.
Thank you, Eric. So welcome everyone to our budget workshop. I'm going to jump right in. Eric gave a nice overview of what we're going to cover tonight. So you all have received your budget document. And so in this budget, our total budget for the year in expenditures is $138 million, and in revenues, $135.1 million. Now, this is total for all funds and for one-time and ongoing expenses. This is our citywide budget. So if we move forward and we look at the all funds by fund type. So the general fund, our largest fund, and as you all know, that's the majority of services within the city. It's our police and fire, it's our parks, it's our streets and roads, engineering services, our marine safety, as well as our finance, HR, that type of thing. So the general fund is the largest fund in our all funds overview. Here's the other funds that are there. Our second largest is our enterprise fund, which is our water and sewer items. So we're going to focus tonight mostly on the general fund. And so if we look at the general fund revenues and expenditures, this is a comparison between last fiscal year and the new fiscal year that we're proposing for the budget. The expenditures go from $75.8 million in 17-18 to $70.9, and the revenues go from $67.2 to $65.1. So while those seem to be going down, this is the fact that these include one-time costs. And so you'll often see one-time costs will raise the budget in some years when we have a large project, let's say the Ole Hansen Beach Club or something like that. And then in the following years, you'll see a drop-off. But again, this is looking at all items. So what we like to tend to do is look at our operating budget, which this is something people can get their mind around a little bit more. So this is your one-time expense or your ongoing expenses and your ongoing costs. And I always like to compare this to, your own household budget when you have your salaries, your rents, whatever it is that you have come in. You want to make sure that the amounts that you expend each month don't exceed what you have coming in. And if they do, you're having to go into your savings account. And as we all know, if you're not making enough to cover your rent, over time, that savings account deteriorates and you won't have enough to continue. So we're always conscious to make sure that our ongoing expenses we have ongoing revenues enough to meet them. And so in this case, for the coming year, 18-19, you can see that our 63.9 is our revenues and our 63.7 is our expenditures. This is excluding our one-time items. So the general fund operating position this year, this is basically looking at those operating revenues over expenditures, and we come up to a little bit less than $200,000. You heard me say earlier on the third quarter that the current year we're in, we had $1 million in operating position. We've been hoping to kind of keep it between $500,000 and $1 million. This year we've had some expenditure growth not being met by our revenue growth, and so this is where we're at this point, $200,000. It's still positive, so that's a good thing, but it's less than 0.5%, so it does not give us a lot of cushion if our revenues don't come in as we anticipate or if our expenditures are higher. So moving on, we're going to look at total general fund revenues. So this chart shows the difference. You can see taxes, permits and fees, intergovernmental, and so forth. The 18-19 budget, $65.1 million, again, the total budget. It's about $2 million less than the revenues from the prior year in total. And the last year we had some one-time grants, our Safe Rides to School programs is, as an example of that. I think that was $1.4 million in grant revenue that we received that we wouldn't be getting in the coming year. So if we look at our property taxes, I think this has been a good story. We see, I put this chart up most years. You could see that each year over the last, let's say, starting 14, 15, you could see that slow, steady growth that we've been seeing in property taxes. And that's reflective of what you see, what you hear and read in the papers, and what you see if you go try and buy a home. Home values are going up, which it's difficult if you're buying a home, but from a city perspective, that brings in more property taxes as those homes sell and the assessed valuations increase. So that, as well as some new development in the city over the last few years, the Sea Summit homes, have helped us to increase this. The question is, how long will these large increases be seen? There is a lag in property taxes, so we have not seen any decrease yet. When we start seeing that trend, it'll take a couple years to cycle through into property tax value or revenues. So, this is a good story. If we move on to sales tax.
Did you have a question about that, Lori?
I did, but I think Judy answered it. I guess when you look at that chart, it's, for those of us that have been around for a while, it used to be new units drove that price. And so when the ranches developed, it was like, oh, look, our property taxes are fantastic. Even they're bulletproof through a recession. And, now we're into year 8 of expansion in the economy. So now we're seeing the rewards of that. And you answered it pretty much. I was curious if you could tease out what was due to new units versus actual real estate property appreciation.
I would have to do more. I can't tell
but it's just that we won't have 300 more homes coming online the next time there's a recession. Correct. To offset any recession impacts.
If you were to calculate new units with just sales, so for example, a home that was assessed at maybe $300,000 sells for $2 million, does that trigger like a new home would in that regard, where it would have the same effect?
It triggers the assessed valuation of that home would go up. Now, there's some cases where it doesn't. If it's a transfer among a family member, there's certain things that people could do, or senior citizens. There's some times where that doesn't trigger it. But in general, if someone sells a home, it valued at $300,000 for $2 million, the assessed valuation goes up, and the city will see that increase in sales tax revenue.
So it has the net effect of almost being a new home in some regard. Yeah.
Yes. Now, the interesting thing is, though, we don't see it for quite some time, because the first year you buy it, there's a supplemental. If you've bought homes, you've seen that, and that supplemental goes into a county pool and is given to everyone around the county, all supplementals from all county sales. But then the following year, when it becomes regular sales tax to the city, you'll see that revenue.
There's a 2-year lag. There's a 24-month lag.
It depends on when you buy.
It depends on when it sells, right? Yeah,
it depends on when it sells, correct.
The
December
other
or
lag
February.
that I think the other thing we need to realize is that San Clemente's a growing senior population. And so the provision for the tax allows seniors to carry forward a lower rate one time. So we can have a lot of seniors that are the only ones that are available that can afford to buy some of the more expensive homes, but then they're going to carry forward and transfer over their lower property tax from where they used to be. So that kind of almost cancels out some of the growth we've seen. That's why it's steady, but it's kind of flattening out.
You're welcome. So moving to sales tax, here's reflective of, we were talking earlier, Councilmember Donchek was talking earlier about the growth of new development. So you see between 14-15 to 15-16, and then again to 16-17, you see some large growth there, and that's the opening of the outlet center. Actually, back in 14-15, we're talking about Target. The full realization of Target. It happened before that, but the full realization of that coming on, the outlet center, and then the Sprouts, Estrella, TJ Maxx center. So you'll see the growth in those, but then you can see for the last couple years, 9.9, 9.9, and 10.2, we're really seeing a flattening out because there's not a whole lot of new development. And for the new stores that are opening, again, they're kind of counteracting the fact that brick and mortar stores are seeing less and less sales tax revenue for cities. So, we're still at 10 million, and that's a good thing, but the expectation that this will continue to rise in large percentages is probably not there without new development, which, we don't really have that coming in.
I have just a question that maybe staff could get back to us on. It's just a thought. We did away with, during, as we were balancing our budgets in years past, the position for a business development person, for the city. It wasn't cost effective as we're getting built out and so on and so forth, what's been explained. What if we relooked at that position with a basic salary but a bonus structure built in, that they would participate at a certain percentage of growth in our sales tax side? In other words, their big pay came if they actually was able to generate revenue for the city, and therefore their cost would be carried by what they were able to generate for the city. And therefore we're setting ourselves up for someone that's only involved in looking to help promote the city, bring businesses in, make sure they're successful. And the more successful they are, the better they're doing as far as on their paycheck, and the better the city is doing on revenue. So I just thought maybe it was a different way to approach it, that we may be able to carve in and put someone in that position and to be able to afford them without, we're so short in our budget as it is, without encumbering more expense. So just an idea that if you can try to play with, that'd be great.
We can look at that and come back to council.
Judy, can I ask a quick question on that?
Of course.
Mayor, on our sales tax, what do we have in the way of verifying that we're being paid the sales tax that we should be, that we're actually collecting that?
We work with a sales tax consultant, as many cities do. HDL is the name of that company, and they continually do research to determine that the proper sales tax is coming to our city, and we often receive, I'd say probably once every couple months, we receive a notice from them of sales tax that they have found that belongs to our city, or it belongs to the online pools, which is also a help to us, because if that sales goes into the online pool, we get a percentage of it. We don't get all of it, but at least we get some of it. So HDL monitors that for us and does the work to ensure that the proper sales tax is coming to our city.
But it takes a while to look at everyone. That's just, on an ongoing basis, they're checking certain sectors or something.
Yes.
That might be something that we could increase to try to get more revenue. That
Like
we're
sales
not
tax
collecting.
audits, that type
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah, thanks.
Lori?
This is a quick one, too.
Yes.
The outlet malls, I seem to recall last year they were about $700,000 of sales tax. Is that pretty close?
So I thought someone
So
might ask this. So I made
my
my
question
note.
is going to be, I know that Phase 2 hasn't happened, the hotel hasn't happened, the theaters haven't happened, and the outbuildings, the 4 restaurants. So what % of the project is yet to come, from your point of
Well,
view?
let me answer the first question regarding the dollar amount. So we just had a sales tax consultant meeting. We have them every quarter, and so the total for calendar year 2017 that was brought in from the outlets was $872,000. Okay. So that's the calendar year 17. So the timing is so.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can exactly tell you what we've put in here, because there's a percentage increase, but it's based on a different timing. So that was the first question. The second is what percentage is done. I can't tell you that because I don't know what their plans are for Phase 2, how big, how, the footprint. I do know that there are other things coming. We have not built in any revenue for the restaurants because those are, we don't know when. We have built in some for the movie theater, but it's not, that doesn't bring in a lot. So we don't make any assumptions on the build-out in the future, because right now it just seems like it's so uncertain and the timing is so uncertain.
Okay. The 872 is good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else on sales tax right now? Okay, so I've added a chart this year. We hadn't had a chart like this before, and it's not in the book, but I talk about TOT in the book. So I just want to make sure that we look at this revenue source as well. Now, while it's nowhere near as big as the other two, if you remember, sales tax is $10 million and property tax is $33 million. So this is a small amount, but it's important to note that since 16-17, we've been addressing some quality of life issues with our transient occupancy tax, with our short-term lodging units, and made some regulations that have decreased the revenue from those. And so, these quality of life issues are good, but there is an impact. And so I just want to make sure that we, see that we have lost about $500,000 in revenue since 16-17, going into 18-19. And, the number for 18-19, we'll have to keep a close eye on this. We may be bringing back something mid-year because we're not sure how many people are going to apply through some of the new ordinance allows for some hardship cases and that type of thing. We're not sure how many people will apply and what revenue we'll see, but there's changes in that. But I just wanted to make sure that we see that this is on a downward trend, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something to be observed.
Do you see that number stabilizing at that number, or do you see it decreasing more?
I feel like it might decrease a little bit more, but the telling will be in this next few months when we see who applies and who renews their business license and what happens. Although, it's also to say once you shrink these, maybe some of the ones who operate will actually bring in more revenue while the others are lost. I'm not really sure about that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
So that covers our the majority of our general fund revenues. If we move on to general fund expenditures, again, the total, 70.9, including one-time capital projects, everything else. Again, this shows a decrease, but the majority of this decrease is from capital projects in the prior year. We had like the BPR master plan, some contract assistance and community development. There was some other costs in community development, the local coastal plan, that type of thing. So I would like to point out some of the main components of the operating budget that are impactful. So the first is personnel. We talked about this already a little bit, the MOU. We're going to be in the second year of that 3-year agreement next year. Salaries increased by 3.1%, but has been pointed out there's also a take-back of 1.1%. So the net increase is 2% that employees get. And as James was alluding to earlier, what happened in the prior MOU is that the increases, it was the same thing. It was like 2.75, but then a take back. And so at the time, part-time hourlies were receiving the whole increase where the full-times were getting sort of the net of the two. There's also an annual increase to the city pay portion of health insurance in the MOU. And then the budget also includes ongoing step increases for employees that are eligible. So as employees retire or leave the city who've been here for quite a while, when new employees come in, they often come in at a lower step, and then those increases occur on a regular basis as they get experience here at the city and in their position. There are some staffing changes in the budgets. I'm just highlighting these in one slide. If you look on page 42 in your budget is the decision packages, and several of these are noted in there, and then there's some other page numbers at top. And I apologize, I didn't mention this earlier, but those page numbers are where you see information on this part of the budget in the budget. So in terms of the number of positions, the general fund, all funds in total, it's a net increase of 0.32 FTE positions. And that's basically from we're adding a management analyst position, and then we're eliminating a part-time public information officer. And I want to point out that last year we did a bunch of restructuring. We had some people leave, and we restructured. And last year the net was a decrease of 0.25 positions. So between each year, we're at an increase of 0.07 positions. We're not doing a whole lot in terms of adding staff to the budget. However, we are doing position adjustments. And this kind of talks to what Eric was saying. We're reorganizing and re-strategizing to meet priorities. And so you'll note in the decision packages, we have 5 positions going from a level 2 or to a level 2 or to a senior. We're regrading 2 positions. We've restructured an IT, and then we're having 3 vacant positions be reclassified to a different position to meet the department's needs. So with all of that going on, the general fund, and this is including the position increase, $52,000 total impact, and in other funds it's a $15,000 total impact. So in some cases we've reduced overtime or something else in order to fund the position. We've downgraded positions, so we've done a few things to be able to do this with relatively small dollars. So I think this is important. This is our staffing levels. So if you look this year for 18-19, we're going to be total 203.86. Now, this does not include any hourly positions. This is just benefited part-time and full-time. I think the key thing in this slide is if you look back to 9-10, we were at 209.79. And you don't see the year before that, but in 08-09, we were at almost 214 positions. So we're operating 10 years later, 11 less positions. However, we have more residents, more facilities, more legal issues, more public records requests, more citizen, needs and desires, community expectations. We just don't have more employees. So all those things are going up, and the employee count is going down. So I think that's an important slide to see. Another piece of the personnel are our pension costs. And so for our general and marine safety employees, the increase in the general fund is $120,000, about a 6% increase. And that includes the MOU has salary increases. Well, there's a benefit component to that. When those increase, the benefits increase. Actuarial assumptions and investment performance drives this increase through CalPERS. We have also a phase-in of a lower discount rate. I talked a lot about this at the LTFP, but basically CalPERS is adjusting what they anticipate we'll be able to earn on our investments. And when you do that, if you need a certain amount over here, you only have 5 years to get there, or 30 years, whatever you have. If the rate goes down that you're anticipating, then obviously you need more to be able to fund this expense at the end of the 30 years. So that drives up the costs. And then on the positive side, our costs are offset. These increases are offset by the fact that we are having employees pick up a larger share of their pension costs based on the MOU. So in addition to those pension costs, I also put it on here, I want to, this is a big part of the story. These are not shown in pension. It's part of our debt service line item. But we have increases for prior police and fire safety employees that used to be our employees, and we have a pension obligation to those past employees for when they do retire. So that contribution increases this year $229,000, which is a 22% increase. Last year it increased $445,000. So the 2-year total is an increase of $675,000 a year, or 114% more than we were paying 2 years ago. So that $675,000, our budget just has to have that operating cost in it go forward from here on in. So that's a big $700,000 increase that it's hard to fund. So these are the kind of pension increases that we see and that impact us, that we don't really have much of a choice in.
I think we all reach for the button simultaneously.
You have questions, or?
Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, the question I have is, have you worked the numbers going further? Because eventually, now these are, what we're talking about right now, the $675,000 increase. We're talking about in the previous contract to the public safety employees that used to be part of city employees.
Yes.
So that was before we contracted it out.
Yes.
Okay, so eventually I would believe that number has got to start coming down, because we're all mortal, and eventually there'll be less people taking those retirement checks. So have you worked, is there any actuarial work into where we've seen that the crescendo start to hit the top and come back down?
The actuarial work has been done on projecting out a 20-year amortization period, and that the large increase that occurred 2 years ago was because we changed from a 30-year to a 20-year. So in a perfect world, if all their estimates are correct, what they're making right now, this would be paid off in 20 years, and there'd be enough funding there to pay all of those employees for however long that they're there. As we've all seen, it doesn't seem like that ever happens. The next thing you know, people are living longer, and which is a good thing, but hard for the pension. So I think this is just paying off the liability that we have based on those actuarial assumptions currently for how long people will live when they're retiring. The public safety employees, their percentages at 50 is where many of them retire. So, people living to 88 years old, I mean, that's a 38-year ongoing. So I don't see this going away anytime soon. And then there's also, when they die, there's also a benefit sometimes to beneficiaries, which also is an ongoing payment at times. So I don't think this is going away anytime soon. We could pay it off in 20 years, but it's about right now it's about $1.3 million a year that we're paying on this.
Considering that you just put me at probably dying in 17 years, so I won't be looking to doing anything for 20.
I use that day because my mother's 88, so I'm like, well, she's lived to 88, so I imagine.
So if I recall from our last budget meeting, this number quadrupled, I think, in 4 years, and it went from, not quadruple, I guess it would be, whatever that number would be, went from $500,000, and it's going to get to $2 million. Is that right? Because I'm trying to figure out where we are now.
We're at 1.3 right now.
1.3.
I expect the increases over the next few years are going to be about $50,000 a year.
Okay, so it's not going to get to that $2 million, because I had thought that we were going to have a very significant, like, a $500,000 to $2 million jump within a 3 to 4 year period of time.
That's not going to happen. No.
Okay.
That's not to say it couldn't get to $2 million in maybe 10 years.
Right. We're not going to see another $675,000 increase.
No, I expect next year will be more around 100,000. And again, it depends on performance of the investments as well. So if the investments are performing well, we may actually get a little bit of a break on that as well.
And the reason again was there a change in the actuarial assumptions, or was there a change in the rate of return on the investments? What was it that triggered?
Several of those things. The biggest one, the 17-18, was because they went to a 20-year amortization. So just like your loan at your house, if you do 20 years versus 30, it's a higher payment. They felt that the 30 was on these inactive plans was kind of waiting too long to get it paid off because there's no new dollars coming in, no new employees in this plan. It's only people who are inactive and would be retiring soon enough.
Okay.
Well, I was just going to ask, off of Steve's point, there's a lot of these employees that were city employees that are still working, and they're included in this number as well.
Yes.
So to Steve's point, they might not all be dying off.
No, they haven't even retired yet, much less
there's a lot of
living
people that are
their
still
retirement
working
life. Yeah.
I wasn't really pointing at you when I was talking about that.
95, that's for sure. So my point is it can go on for a substantial amount of time.
Correct.
Beyond the 30 years.
Correct.
Yeah, because we could have still people that work for the city that are currently now working for the county, but they still have this in their city portion that's to be paid out when they retire.
Exactly.
Understand?
And so remember, though, the payments we're making is not the direct payment to them, but it's paying the liability to them. So if we had, $20 million, we could just pay that off today. That'd be great, but we don't. So make the payments. Okay. So total general fund expenditures, this is by department. So we looked at kind of the general items, and so this is by department, general government, finance, administrative services. For the most part, the dollar changes you see here are, again, mostly related to one-time items and capital projects. When you look at the operating budgets, there's not a whole lot of change going on in most of them. So I'm going to briefly, general government probably has the things that most people bring up and are interested in. We have transfers totaling $4.1 million. Per the LTFP, $780,000 going to reserve funds, plus an additional $2.5 million to the facilities maintenance reserve. This is to shore up those reserves, which you didn't have funded very well in the past couple of years, so we've been making efforts to get those funded. We also have $756,000 going to the annual street improvement fund. That's been ongoing for quite some time. Our contributions to Casa Animal Shelter, about $800,000 for our share of those costs, and that's down about $16,000 from the prior year. Our payments to fund insurance and claims increases $26,500, so that's good. We've seen some large increases, so that's a small increase for this year. The DBA funding that came up earlier, that is funded at in the budget at $27,000 is the proposal. Last year it was $30,000 was the total number. I'm not sure with the 16.5% increase, but last year's $30,000. And each year for the last, I think 4 or 5 years, we've been doing a 10% reduction each year. That was a council direction from back in the day. So that's where we went from 30 to 27,000 here. There's community grants of $71,400 for a variety of community projects. And then our council contingency is funded at $100,000 for 18-19.
2 quick questions. I'll do the easy one first. I agree with Councilmember Ham about keeping the DBA subsidy at the $30,000 for another year. And in fact, it looks like it was $34,200 in our records. But if there's council agreement.
What page are you
on that-
referencing there?
It's on page 96, and page 96 under other charges.
Yeah, and
The-
by the way, I agree too.
Yeah, yeah. I think
The
we should-
34.2, just so you know, 30,000 was the budget, but then if they hadn't spent everything in the prior year, so
Oh, it
apparently it was
rolled
about
over.
4,000 that got
So they
carried
didn't
over.
use it. That's interesting.
I was looking at Jake, he said it was a carryover, but.
That's usually what those are.
Oh, okay.
'Cause
So the
it
30
was-
is what we should pay
it was
attention
at
to.
30.
Okay. So,
Sometimes if there's timing or something like that, something overlaps during the end of the year, we'll
Check doesn't
carry
get
forward
cut
the
until
budget.
June 3rd, so.
So-
but I'd like to keep it at 30. They're so important to our community, and even though the speaker had to go quickly through his first slides, they do so many events that are just amazing.
They do a lot of events, but they've been increasing their events, expanding them, especially the Glitz, which also expanded our costs greatly as far as the sheriff costs went, opening up, I don't know if it was a beer garden or whatever that was unexpected for last year. So I'm concerned that our costs have gone up greatly also. And that's not being taken into consideration because we were lowering the DBA, trying to get them to do a lower amount because we're not subsidizing other areas of the city, I don't believe, like we are the DBA. But that's my concern is the costs. They talk about how much they're expanding. I don't think they take into consideration what it costs the city to do that also.
Well, on the
So
other
we
s-
need to be careful with that.
On the other side of the coin, though, they're bringing a lot more people into the city that are spending money, that our stores are getting the benefit that the small growth we've seen in sales tax could be somewhat also, they could have contributed to that by having more people in here and having more events in here. So
Well, I think it
there's
definitely
kind of a trade-off.
increases, it helps the downtown. But that was just something that I was aware of this last Glitz. There's a big concern on how much we're spending to police that. And I don't know about fire, but I think fire also had to
So I can
greatly cover
address some of
that.
your concerns, Kathy. So I for one, I'm going to support what you said, Lori, and I was going to even ask for 32,000 to make it a nice even round number. I'm hopeful that by Derek showing up this evening, we're going to have a renewed partnership with the DBA that we haven't had since I've been on council. And so one of the reasons I supported the initial decrease 5+ years ago was because we had this at that time, I think it was $42,000 annually we were writing a check for, and there was no financial records to support why or where that money was going. The one year we did get, it was very vague on where those funds were actually being allotted to. And so we hold ourselves to a certain level of scrutiny on where our funds are placed. And so since the past year and a half plus that I've been the DBA board rep, I've seen quarterly reports, I've seen annual reports, and it's a very fine accounting of where those funds are going to. The second thing is to address your concern, Kathy, is my goal hopefully is to get the DBA to be in a much more financially sound position. And so Kathy's right, last Glitz, I believe, was a beer garden, for lack of a better term. And so that's an opportunity to generate revenue, much like the Chamber of Commerce does for the Fiesta every year. And so the idea is that we treat the DBA and the Chamber very similarly in the fact that we do not charge the Chamber of Commerce for public safety costs during their one event of the year. And I would like to see that same gratuity carried over to the DBA. So I think we're working in the right direction. I think we all see the DBA as a valid partner, and the events they put on are being more and more successful because the community supports the DBA and supports those events. So I think we should too.
Well,
Do you have comments? Or Kathy, you want to follow up on that?
just real quick, then I think there needs to be definitely a better accounting and better, I am concerned that they're going to have to start to hire people.
Yeah.
That we might be helping to pay for that. I don't know if we
So
should
Eric
be
can
paying for that.
address one of those concerns.
Yeah, however, I know Councilmember
yeah.
Schwartz wants to
I
comment
just
first.
one other thing is that I would like to work with them so that if the events are becoming more popular and more successful, more people coming in, they might be able to adjust some of their fees that they're charging the people involved in it so that they become more of a break even for them. So I would like to work with them going forward to adjust from a business point of view what they're charging and what's coming in, and get to the point that we don't have to subsidize them for that. We can spend their subsidizing on providing them security and everything, other things that the city can do, promotion, other areas, like we do for other things.
We're doing just that, Steve. So a lot of the fees that were charged in the past were antiquated fees dating back to the 90s. And so we're looking at adjusting those. But Eric, did you want to address the accounting portion of it?
So, well, one thing, they're required to submit all invoices to the city when they're seeking reimbursement. So we go through and reconcile to make sure that what we're giving them is what they spent. There's no markup. There's no administrative costs. Secondly, the Beaches Park and Master Plan, one of the recommendations, if you recall, was to go back and look at old partnerships to make sure that they're updated. This would be a great candidate to look at the partnership that spells out specifically what subsidies from city services are given and when and where, and what subsidies are not given. And so that's something I do think in the next year or two we'll be bringing back different partnerships that haven't been looked at for decades that need to be looked at as it relates to subsidizing sheriff costs or fire costs and so forth. So at least from a transparency standpoint, the council knows exactly what's the city's providing those services, and they know what's being provided. So it's managing expectations. So I do plan on bringing that back in the near future.
Great, so you're going to, if I put it in other terms, you're going to monetize what benefit they're getting or what's happening.
It's almost like
what the city is spending besides what we're just writing a check for.
Absolutely.
What
Just
our
like
overall support is.
Ocean Fest would be the best example I can give of a recent partnership that we updated that basically monetized all of the costs that the city is providing. I want to say it was like roughly $53,000 in city services that are being provided with time frames and very specific so that everyone knows, okay, I'm going to get 4 cops to do this, and I'm going to get Public Works to do street control or traffic control and so forth. So that will be something that we will bring back in the near future.
What percentage of the DBA's budget are we covering?
I don't know the DBA's budget. I would defer to the DBA to speak to that.
Okay. I'm curious about.
I'll put that on the list of things to bring back to the council to communicate.
I mean, I don't want to be facetious about this, but, you know, with property values accelerating, and particularly rents along Del Mar have doubled, if not tripled, over the past 10 years, this seems like a pretty small number compared with the overarching business interest for that whole community. I mean, I'm just, you know, we're talking about tens of millions of dollars worth of property and businesses. You know, the grant looks pretty small in comparison. So I'm just kind of curious where we stand in the middle of all this, and ultimately, is it just kind of an historical anachronism we're just going to seize onto because we've always done that? Is there really a need for it? I guess we'll find that out in the partnership process.
I can definitely give you their overall budget before we visit their partnership agreement.
So,
Oh.
I was just going to, I
did
just
you
want to
wanna
make sure we
wind
get
up on that?
direction before we
so
finish
is it
the
30 or
topic.
32? 32 is fine with me.
And I'll go with 32 too.
Yeah, and I like the idea of the partnership revisit, so.
Is that
Just
32
direction.
pending?
It'll come back to you in the budget adoption,
Oh.
so you'll be adopting it as a budget.
But is it pending their looking at their contract, or are we going to be looking at it in this next year?
You'll be looking at their contract or their partnership in the next year or so. But we'll come back at budget adoption at a minimum with their overall budget that they are funding for the next year, so you have that
We'll
figure.
have all the old numbers that
Correct.
Tim was talking about.
Just gauging the will of the council, I think that's an acceptable number.
The 32,000, from
Yeah,
27
and
to
the number of
32.
what monetize what we're doing. Same.
Got it. Is, for council direction, do we want to cease the decrease and just leave it at 32,000 static for future years, since we had been in the last 4 fiscal years at a practice of 10% every year? So is it safe to say we'll just lock in at 32,000 and then we'll revisit the partnership?
With a revisit
agreement
next
through
year.
the subsidy?
Yeah, absolutely.
That sounds
Okay.
accurate. I'm fine
Thank
with
you.
that. Okay, shifting gears now to the Ole Hansen Beach Club. On page 99 of the summary by department, so, and this, Judy, builds off of your, it used to be a big expense and now it's not. You have budgeted for next year $122,000 for the Ole Hansen Beach Club. Is that going to be the run rate for maintaining it going forward, or is some piece of that going into a reserve fund for unpleasant surprises? It's on page 99. It's under Beaches, Parks, and Recreation. It's the first line item.
By the way, just when we did that park estimates back in Parks and Rec,
Yeah.
when we're looking at the budgets, about $1 million a year was what we expected it was going to cost to run that.
To run Ole Hansen Beach Club. No, that was Vista Hermosa.
No, I meant Vista Hermosa.
Yeah,
Were you
that's
talking about
Vista-
Ole Hansen?
I'm talking about Ole
Oh,
Hansen.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That 121,000?
Yeah, is that the run
rec
rate?
programming costs, recreation programming
Okay, so that
costs.
doesn't have anything to do with maintaining the pool? No,
Just
okay.
recreation programming that's offered at the facility.
Oh. Why was it at 1,440,000 then? Well, so it looks like in 2016 we had almost $500,000 of activities there?
There's been some changes in how the structuring of the expenses there. So at one point, we had the pool costs and the programming there, but it wasn't, it's more efficient to put all the pool costs in one section rather than trying to split between
Is that
the
part of the
pools.
maintenance budget now?
That's what I'm trying to
It's part of the aquatics. Yeah, there's a split because there's aquatics maintenance that's done through Beaches, Parks, and Recreation, and there's maintenance that's done through the maintenance department. So it's not all in one place, I guess is what I'm saying.
So these numbers in this column.
This is apples and oranges then.
Right.
Okay.
So
Okay,
the-
so what do I get for 121,580?
So that's Samantha.
Yeah, what?
It's her
okay.
programming.
Is that yoga or is that?
Samantha's going to come and speak to that.
It would be good if you would footnote when things like that happen, because I just assumed that was the end of the capital improvement project, and
CIPs were out, and that was the true cost
Yeah.
going forward.
yeah,
Understood.
So my own clarification, because I want to make sure I'm on the right page. Is this out of 621? It is, okay. So as Judy mentioned, I'll take that actually. Just my own. As Judy mentioned, last fiscal year, we kind of redid and restructured our aquatics budget. So we collapsed all the aquatics expenditures and revenues into different accounts. So it used to be that the beach club facility had, and it was in one account. It was both the pool and the facility. With the 24 carats agreement that we now have in place, we decided we should peel those off. So now we have the beach club as a facility account, and then there's an aquatics account, and then there's a San Clemente Aquatic Center and Vista Hermosa account. So that beach club and Vista Hermosa Aquatic Center account are really about the facilities. So it might be the lobby, it could be the club room or the friends room, pool deck furniture, items like that are going to be in our expenses. And then you'll see anything related to pools out of that 625, which is labeled aquatics. And maintenance as well has money tagged for aquatics facility maintenance also. But aquatics houses, that is in the budget program is 625 for aquatics.
I think you mean 695. Is that what I'm looking at?
695 is
I don't see the 6.
Public Works.
Dollar amount. Are you looking at an account number or dollar?
Oh, I thought she was.
Program number, yeah.
Program numbers here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the account
So
number.
yeah,
Okay,
the beach club is it's specifically the facility. So that would be the
Okay,
things like
so
the classes.
What is the taxpayer getting for their 121,580 that's budgeted for 2018-19 at the Ole Hansen Beach Club? Is that maintenance or is that
Correct. It's
yoga
the maintenance
classes?
of the actual facility, and it could. There are some contract classes, so it might be a yoga class in the club
They're
in the
buried
club
in here
room.
too?
They're buried in that facility. Yes. Not the pool classes are not though. Those are in a different account.
Which account are they in?
Aquatics.
So the one that says
1.168.
1.2 million is where that is. Okay.
Correct.
All right.
So does that include the staffing costs also for the beach club in that 121, or is that?
It does, yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
that would be the front desk staff costs, and those are the only staff that live out of that beach club account. We have a 30-hour benefited part-time at the front desk there.
Okay, so, and maybe we should do this offline, but I'm looking at the aquatics line, and in 2016, it was only $200,000, and then it went up to 1.1 million, and now it's 1.2 million. So that's like $1 million jump. And that, what was driving, and I know maybe you took 200,000 out of the OHBC to put it, what's going on?
I think it was the change in the budgeting practices.
Exactly.
So it was how it was allocated. So before, maybe the aquatics budget only covered a very small section of it, and they've since reassigned the costs. So it's probably not a great comparison from previous years. 'Cause
Okay,
it's not
so we
apples.
should have a footnote then on things like
Okay.
that going forward, because otherwise it's just alphabet soup.
Probably like 300,000 came off of the
Yeah.
Holy Answer and went down to aquatics.
Yeah, and the only reason I'm okay with this is if you look at the 4.8 and the 4.9 at the bottom, they're kind of the flat.
So yeah, you look at the next column down,
Yeah.
it's 1.48, and then it goes to half,
Yeah.
right? And then
Yeah.
so it gets apportioned across there just a little
So
bit.
if this could be clarified going forward, that'd be terrific. Because to your point, this is going to be a serious ongoing expense, maintaining all these wonderful facilities we have.
Staff will add a footnote, and what we ran into is, as you may remember, council had the Vista Hermosa operating reserve. What happened is we came to the full use of that reserve, and everything essentially went to zero in that reserve. And then we came back and we go, you know what? Having Vista Hermosa and aquatics and field all in the same area, we tried to go more towards a programming basis as opposed to, I'll call it Vista Hermosa, Steed Park, that type of stuff, because we don't do that for the rest of the parks. So we try to move more towards the aquatics and then fields and that. So this is, again, I can understand your confusion. We probably should have clarified that a little bit more, but we only had that last actual year to kind of deal with. Maybe we should have waited another year or done the breakouts for the 16,
flagged it.
17.
Okay.
It's just everything was kind of grouped in Vista Hermosa's sports park, which include the aquatics and the field, and trying to get a way to break those costs out would have been very laborious.
That
So-
whole-
Okay, and so I guess the message I want to send is I'm deeply concerned about the maintenance of all of our park, of our park system. And that's been a steady drumbeat from the council. And so that's why this gets the level of scrutiny it does, because it's after public safety, it's the biggest line item, arguably.
Yeah,
And that's a good, that's a good comment for us. I was part of putting the numbers together, and I didn't think about it because I kind of knew what was going on. But having a footnote on that page clarifying that would be, I can see how that
and
would.
That's job security for you.
And just also, I was part of the group that, when I was on Parks and Rec, originally worked on Vista Hermosa and everything, the budgeting, the layout, and the whole bit. And we, at that time, has suggested that we look for an operator to run the aquatic portion, that we would then actually make it a positive cash flow instead of an expense item for the city. What I would like to do with that still in the back of my mind is at least have it footnoted as to what the aquatics portion of that park is costing us. In other words, what's it costing us to run it versus if we look at the alternative to bring in another private entity to run it as a profit center for them and us.
If I can comment, we can pull together those numbers, but, there comes a point where we kind of had to make a choice between do we budget by facility or do we budget by program? And we don't have and nor do I want, a robust enough system that we can have a database and we can cut and slice and dice. So sometimes, if you do it one way, as Jake said, that helped us with the reserve because we could only fund Vista Hermosa with that, but it wasn't very efficient from a accounting and budgeting and staffing standpoint because everybody had to be split. So now we're on more the program basis. So we could pull those numbers together for you, but, it's difficult to have both, is what I'm saying.
As an ongoing budgeting practice, it's difficult to have both. So if for one time.
Not for ongoing, but just you can do this just so I take a look at it and we can maybe have that discussion regarding that decision. So.
And what I will do just in this interim is we can definitely, at a minimum right now, where it relates to the Ole Hansen Community Center, Community Services, we can give you via a letter just what are in those buckets in terms of the services so you at least know while we identify the other accounting issues that you brought forward for noting purposes.
Okay, so I'm going to move on past general government. So we had some highlights from just some other departments. There's not much here because there's not a lot going on in them that's different. I mean, let me take that back. There's a lot going on in all of them, but from a budget standpoint, not a lot of change from one year to the next. So a couple things I just want to point out in the finance and administrative services area. We do have a limited term revenue analyst. That position, we're extending it only for 3 months just to transition out of that position, and that will be expiring at the end of that time. Community development, there was one budget enhancement for tablet devices for the building division to make their work in the field easier and more efficient. In Public Works, I want to point out that we're continuing the annual $250,000 budget for minor maintenance projects. We started that a while back, and we're finding that that's been very helpful. Eric mentioned earlier to me about using that for some of the park master plans, some of the things in there that are small items but could be funded through this. And then in Beaches, Parks, and Recreation, there's some budget enhancements, one-time items, about $43,000 worth, mostly at the Aquatic Center. So then the final general fund department that I want to spend some time on is our public safety department. In total, our funding for public safety is $29.9 million, and for the coming year, this will be 47%, almost 50% of our general fund operating budget. When we talk public safety department, typically police services, fire, and marine safety, those three that you see there, the first three. But as Eric mentioned, we also want to make sure that we're aware that code enforcement, there's a budget there that also goes towards this. And then that pension liability payment that we talked about earlier. It's a public safety cost. While it's not buying us any public safety personnel or anything from it, it is still a cost of this whole program. And so I want to go to Eric wanted to talk a little bit about the Public Safety Task Force, and that came about at our last budget adoption. And so they've had some meetings, and there's some slides here that we're going to look at that Eric can speak to.
Eric, before you jump on that Public Safety Task Force, from what I recall last year and years past, I thought we were at around 46% of our budget was public safety. Has that been increasing the past few years? It felt like at one point it was 44% of our budget. And
it's been increasing. Yes, it has been increasing.
Yeah. Well, I have to assume that pension payment is a significant contributor, but also the contract costs also.
Correct.
It's a painful thing.
I just want to commend staff for finally compiling all the public safety onto one slide. So that's been a big ask of mine for many years, so I appreciate seeing the total public safety costs. I hate seeing the lifeguards who are on the front lines every day being left out of public safety. So thank you, guys.
Very briefly, just to kind of recap and close out what the Public Safety Task Force did. So if you recall, the city commissioned Matrix Consulting to do an assessment of our police services contract. And with that, there were a host of recommendations, one recommendation being to form a public safety task force. And there was a goal of coming up with a strategic plan from the Public Safety Task Force, and then looking at the recommendations brought forward by Matrix. The strategic plan that the Public Safety Task Force came up with was to maintain a quality of life while keeping a high visibility of city services. Do that to me. Oh, of course it jumps. Okay, so background. So as I indicated, July 5th of 16, Council authorized the city to hire Matrix and to evaluate the police services through a comprehensive assessment of service delivery and cost, public input, and council input. The reason we did this was based on continuing rising costs as well as continued need for effective police services. It was desired that an assessment be performed to ensure the city is providing an appropriate level of police services in a cost-effective manner that will be sustainable for future years. Background. Police services in total represents $14.8 million, or 24.61% of the city's total operating budget. However, public safety represents about $28 million, or 46%, and there's been some changes based on budget, 47% of the total operating budget for fiscal year 17-18. The following represents a little bit of an initial proposed increases from the last 5 years of police services. As you can see, we started off with 18-19 as an estimate of 4.66%, which equated to $670,000. Our second estimate, as you see in the proposed budget before you, is 5.57% at $800,000. And then the previous years are there as well, One of the things that we did look at is over the last 5 years, I'm going to look at Judy, we're averaging about 5.7% increase to police services. And just to kind of give you a comparison, we typically in the LTFP, we forecast at about 3% growth year over year in terms of personnel. So that's a little bit higher than what we typically strive for.
I would assume, just really quickly,
Yes,
I would
sir.
assume that matches the rest of the cities in Orange County because of the contract, with the exception of a few that just recently entered into contract services. We
Correct.
were all pretty similar place on that. Real quick, going backwards, that first to the second proposal, the first to second, did that include the additional positions? Is that what happened with the second estimate? Or is that an
So-
apples to apples?
That's apples to apples. So the initial first estimate was 4.6, and then their second estimate was 5.57. That was for no change in services, just their new increase. We go through what we call first estimate, second estimate, and third estimate.
That's from the sheriff's department.
That's directly
to us.
from OCSD.
It
to the
normally
city.
goes down, not up.
That's what we thought, and that's what we had experienced in years past, correct? And it's important to note, I'm glad you brought this up, Mayor, in previous years, we would do things to help lower that cost from an impact standpoint. So, defunding vacant positions or realigning things to make the cost more palatable to our budget.
That's right. So, but these estimates weren't where we ended up, though, because that 9.48, I think, turned into 6. The 8.91 turned
Correct.
into like 5.5.
Correct.
So
These are just first initial estimates. So
Right.
many of these didn't end up that way. However, in this fiscal year, we're going to be landing at the second estimate at 5.57. So then on March 2nd, 2017, the city's long-term financial plan presented the police services study from Matrix Consulting. And then April 18th of 17, the city council approved the process of forming a public safety task force to review, discuss, and analyze data to achieve consensus on recommendations for potential implementation measures. Additionally, the task force will initiate and develop a community-based public safety strategic planning process that will result in a public safety strategic plan for the council to review and approve for future implementation. Here are the meetings that we conducted, and as you see, we started off with an overview of the study and developed the public safety strategic plan. In August, we ended up having a presentation from the Orange County Homeless Liaison, Susan Price, and also had a public safety contract overview by Judy Vincent. And then in September, we did a code enforcement update and overview, and then we also talked about the public safety strategic plan. And then in November, OCSD did an overview, and the city attorney did a presentation on measures that the city attorney had done to mitigate issues within the city of San Clemente, i.e., your panhandling ordinance, the anti-camping ordinances, etc. And then in March, we began the actual deliberation of the public safety recommendations. As I talked about, so the strategic plan was to maintain a quality of life while keeping a high visibility on city services. The focus points being neighborhoods, quality of life, drug and alcohol abuse and use, communication, how cases/issues are handled, transients and public and private property, lack of police visibility, coordination of public safety services, coordination of other services, for instance, code enforcement, drug abuse in public, and public education of what to do. Task force recommendations. So while there were over 65 recommendations, what we did is we took them all and we gave them to the Public Safety Task Force to survey and to prioritize as the highest needs. And so once we had the highest needs, that's what the task force kind of brought forward. So we have reduced the age limit for RSVPs to increase volunteer base, add staff to police contract, deputies, and administrative, utilize technology to enhance police services, promote community policing and education to the citizens. For example, the Citizens Academy. There was discussion of reviewing the beats and districts regarding patrol services. There was also a discussion of seeking overtime for summertime patrol. And then also a discussion of polling residents to seek interest in tax increases to fund more services. So I can say as we go through the public safety budget tonight, Many of these things you'll see are integrated into the budget. So we've already begun the process of polling. We will begin the process of polling residents to see if there's an appetite for increased taxes to fund public safety or other related services. We're going to be moving forward with reducing the age limit for RSVPs to increase that volunteer base. You'll see, as I give back to Judy, the staffing changes that we're recommending in police services. And then utilizing technology. One of the things that we'll be giving Sheriff's Department leeway is on their side of their budget to look at up to $15,000 a year on technology improvements that they would generate from the county and bring to the city of San Clemente. Reviewing beats. One of the things, if I recall correctly, you need between 4 to 5 officers for a new beat. And so that's something that isn't necessarily obtainable in this year's budget. But again, you'll see some of the changes that we have. Community policing, I think it's fair to say that all of us have seen Lieutenant Peters in the community being more of a community face and a presence, which is half the battle with addressing these issues and educating the citizens. I know that the Orange County Sheriff's Department has just started their Citizen Academy for the county-wide Citizens Academy, so there are opportunities currently to be had. And then overtime will be discussed as part of the public safety. So I want to end that, but I also want to defer to the 2 council members that were on the Public Safety Task Force, Vice Mayor Chris Ham and Councilmember Steve Schwartz. So if they have anything to say, I would defer to them.
Yeah, I'll kick it off. Chris can anchor it. I think the one thing that came out of all the meetings we've had and all the public input we've had is the need to react and respond to and address our growing demands on our patrol people because of the enhanced amount of transients we have down here and the difficulty we are having between that. And it's not just us. Everything that we're seeing in our city, other cities are seeing everywhere across the board. But that doesn't mean we should just excuse it as that's what everyone's having to deal with. I think we do need to respond to it. And it's however we figure it out, how to put more boots on the ground. But boots on the ground is what it's going to take. So we've got to figure out a way, and I'm not going to make everybody happy on the council because I think I would love to see an actual summer patrol where we up one more patrol sector for the summers so we can give more concentration to the bad areas during the summertime, which I still think we're going to have one miserable summer here with what's been going on with that. But I just want to say that there is we have a lot of concern as well as a lot of support from the citizens of our city. They respect and appreciate all of the patrolmen in this area. They do a lot to try to show that, and I just think we need to find a way to assist Mike and everybody to be able to try to at least fight back the wave of transient and criminal problems that we are going to see or we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have heard my song and dance now for 6 years. I have a slightly different take than Steve, but it gets the same net result is that we need to increase public safety. I promised you guys that going forward on the Public Safety Task Force, I wouldn't be driving that home. And I think Steve can attest to I was not a big proponent of increasing public safety. I sat back and listened to what the Public Safety Task Force had to say, as well as the many, many residents that came out and spoke. And overwhelmingly, that was the support. And sitting down and talking with Chief Peters about what he sees as a need for his department moving forward, I'm going to support Steve's request. I think having a additional full-time quad officer like we have in the summer that operates full-time year-round, one officer dedicated to that, an increase to the budget would be a step in the right direction. And that person would not only be the beach patrol in the summer, but they would be beach and trail patrol year-round. And so that would help with all of our open space area concerns that Steve outlined, and just generally increasing service by an entire deputy would be good for the city of San Clemente. How we get there is the difficult question that I think this council was tasked with asking and answering both those questions. It's not going to be an easy conversation, obviously, but it's something that needs to be had because we can't continue down the path that we've been continuing down for the last 15 to 20 years. So with that, I invite any comments.
If I may add, I think if we have Judy do the public safety presentation, that's the next component of this. I think, it may answer some of your questions and then we can deliberate thereafter. So if you're okay with that, Mayor.
I think, yeah, I am. I think the Mendoza line for us on this issue is percentage of budget. We talk about positions and in safety and costs and increase to this, but we really have to keep a very close eye on what percentage of budget is being committed to public safety, because like any municipality, that number continues. Once we passed, 50% should be a big number for us, because I feel like we're once you start breaking into those early 50s, that really does change what you can offer as a city. It'll change our Parks and Recs department, it'll change planning, it'll change a lot of what we offer. So we have to keep a very close eye on that percentage of budget number. That should be a key portion of this budget presentation going forward. That we should always have that and look at the historical context. And maybe that our community, and it is that our community demands a greater, a public safety presence in our community. That's fine, but we have to clearly communicate what that means, right? What that means to the rest of the city. If it means that we're going to have to get used to a certain maintenance that we can't sustain, we're not going to borrow money to fund ongoing operations, and so we have to communicate what it means if we're going to be committing additional funds in a public safety sphere, so that at least we're having the conversation, so that people understand that we don't have this, that it's got to come from somewhere, right? And so we have to clearly make sure that the public understands that, and that when we do get this increased public safety expenditure, that they're going to be comfortable with the takes. We're given the gives, but we got to be comfortable with the takes, and so that's an important part of how this whole process works. And that may be that the public is like, that's fine. We'll be happy with less programming or whatever it is that we're doing in our community. But we just have to make sure that everyone's aware, so that we're not being asked, well, we got this, but we're losing this. We just have to make it clear.
I think it's important to remember, as we talk about adding deputies, that we remember that's about $230,000 per deputy in cost to the general fund. So 4 deputies is close to $1 million. The new beat that we're talking about, adding the new district, we need 5 deputies for. So that's $1.25 million.
James, if I can correct you on that.
Thank you.
$260,000 is the deputy cost per deputy, and there's also usually an additional overhead and administrative cost that goes with that, because the higher each deputy drives additional share costs.
See, in 30 seconds, it got even more expensive than I thought it was.
Mayor, can I ask a question? Where are we on the city's, the review that we were doing of sheriff costs? Where are we on that? I thought we'd have it by budget.
The study that the South County cities, or the contract cities, because it also involves Yorba Linda and Stanton, it's gotten off to a slow start. And, we're not going to have anything for this budget cycle to come back to you with. It'll probably be closer to the mid-year budget review that will come back to you with some data on how that process is going.
Okay. So I think hopefully there's an opportunity there for funding if we have some lower costs. I'll listen to what the task force is going to say on that. I'm curious in what the presentation is. I don't know about adding an entirely new beat to an area of the city. I don't know if we have calls that are like that, but I am interested in the beach. And I don't know, maybe how marine safety could play into some of that. I don't know.
I don't think that marine safety is the proper way to go when it comes to enforcement on the beach. I think we need to keep their eyes focused on the water and what their primary responsibility is.
So as far as rules on the beach. Marine safety does not enforce that. It has to go to PD to do that.
I mean,
Sheriff's?
they do pay attention to it, but I don't want to place them in charge. As things happen, they call attention to it, but it's not their primary responsibility.
I was just thinking as far as covering trails and stuff, added to marine safety, not taking from it.
Okay, so I need the,
No, your recommendation was to go ahead and ask Judy to give her presentation on public safety before we discuss this further?
No.
Is that what you said?
That was my
Oh, okay, okay. Then we'll come back to this.
okay. No, I'm just waiting. There, no. Okay, so just to remind you, we had talked here, the components. So we're going to look at police and fire, the two largest components. So if we look at our police contract, it's going to go in a minute. Go back. So the contract increases by $838,000, which is about a 5.8% increase. That increase in the contract is mainly due to labor contracts, so there's no service level increases. That's all just based on MOUs currently in place. I want to mention that the sworn officers are under an agreement right now that continues, so we know what their increases will be. However, labor negotiations are in process for all the other groups, so law enforcement management and some of the general administrative. So we would expect, we don't know where those are going to land, but typically there's increases involved, and so if that occurs, we would also need additional budget on top of this $838,000 increase mid-year.
Just one quick, does that 15.8 million, does that also include the 1.3 million that we're spending on old pensions?
No. So the money we spend on the pensions is in our debt service fund, and that's what I was talking about earlier. You don't see it in public safety, but I feel like it's kind of out there on its own as debt service.
It's not in the public safety budget?
It's not a part of that at all,
Okay.
no. So we have this increase, and so what was proposed to change the staffing levels in order to stay within this budget, proposals were made, and this is what's now on the table, is the addition of 2 full-time deputy positions, the addition of 1 crime prevention specialist, then defunding $25,000, which we had for a half-time crime prevention specialist. We would delete a vacant CSO position, and then we would reduce overtime to offset the net cost of all of those. So that would mean that we still have an overtime budget remaining of $629,000, and then we have a vacancy credit built in of $200,000.
And the we you're talking about is Lieutenant Peters. He had his hands heavily on this recommendation.
This is done between city manager and lieutenant, and I'm not sure
This is
how
my
all of it
idea.
came down. I get the direction.
Oh,
This is what we put together.
Okay, because at one
This
point,
is my idea, and I've talked to the lieutenant about it. He's going kicking and screaming with this idea. He'd rather have the overtime. My position is that you don't fund operations with overtime. Overtime is for one-time emergencies, things, unforeseen things. People go out on sick or illnesses, injuries. We've had a history of not spending our overtime, and it's come back to us as part of our credit at the end of the year. So my idea was, if we're not going to use our overtime, if we're budgeting $1 million for overtime and we're not using it typically, why don't we use it for 2 more deputies? This year, I directed the lieutenant to use his overtime completely instead of funding deputies. And so he used his overtime for extra patrols and beach patrols and trip activities and that sort of thing. So we did blow through the overtime budget. One thing about the overtime budget, and this is not a fault to the lieutenant, but the county is not very good at keeping us up to date on overtime budgets. So it's difficult for us to stay on top of it and know where we're at on a month-to-month basis. And so, it's hard for Judy and Eric to figure out where we're at monetarily and make sure that we're not spending over our budget. Because I don't want to come back to you and say, I need another $150,000 for overtime. But I would prefer not to spend overtime for doing things that we should be doing with staffing. If we think that we have a staffing need to do extra policing, then we should fund it with money and that we have, and not look to overtime to do that. But I will say that overtime is probably a more efficient use of policing, because deputies, as Judy said, cost $260,000. And when you're not paying for a full-time deputy, you're not paying for all those extra benefits and pension. And this is a problem that Councilmember Ham has at the fire department, that it's cheaper for them to run overtime than it is to hire more firefighters. If we do this, we can ask the lieutenant, but there's a chance we may not have the deputies for 3 to 6 months as the department ramps up, and we'll still have to use overtime and vacancy credits to cover those vacancies in the interim. So,
And, well, then my other question is, the Matrix study was pretty clear that our crime preventions, but I guess no, actually the investigative services section of our department needed a complete overhaul. How does that?
Matrix has told us that we only need 3 investigators, and
How
we
many
have
do we
and
have?
we have 4 investigators.
So can't we move one of those positions over?
The
rather
lieutenant and I have gone back and forth on that, and he would prefer to keep it at 4. So
Thank
I
you.
have honored his wishes at this point.
Is this the last slide on police services, or do you have another slide on police services?
This is the last on police services. I did want to just point out one thing, though, with the vacancy credit, as James was saying. If we have more vacancies than that, it gives extra money to the overtime, if you will. Those two work in sync. So the net of the two is $429,000. But if we don't fill a position for 3 months, that could add another $100,000 to overtime that could be used as additional overtime. So there is more than this if there's more vacancies than $200,000.
Steve?
Yeah. First of all, giving them a green light to hire 2 full-time deputies, we may see that deputy in 6 months. I mean, 3 to 6 months. It's not I got an opening, bring them down. So I'm looking for us to maybe expect to have to be paying more overtime for the summer patrols, so that he can fully patrol and staff how we want it to be, and then revisit the overtime and additional deputy spreads midterm. One, when he's dealt with whatever he can deal with as far as getting us deputies, and looking at where we're at that time. So I'm thinking outside, just thinking about what I'm thinking about.
Does that lend itself to what you just said about the flex time? So while we're not staffing those positions, all that money is budgeted into overtime costs.
It's budgeted and could be used for overtime
Could be
in
used
lieu
for
of
overtime costs if we chose to use it that way.
because we
Would be
do know
there
that-
anyway.
Did you have a question as well?
That was going to be my point, is that the money is there. If the positions aren't filled, it is there for cover.
Okay.
I was trying to get to my reasoning behind going to this direction first. I would like to see a proposal and a budget for the suggested electronic features. I'd like to see something coming up from the department to how we would add additional non-employee costs to maintain some of our safety, such as I think Chief Peters has mentioned it in the past, that we can put up some sensors or some cameras or certain areas. We just need a proposal to know how much that cost is, and maybe in conjunction with what we're doing, we can make an effective dent in what's going on.
And as I alluded in.
The lieutenant and I have been talking about the plate scanners and other surveillance type mechanisms, and that was per the council direction, I think, back in January or February. It's still an ongoing conversation that we need to work out with management at the Orange County Sheriff's Department. How is that data collected? How is it maintained? Who pays for it? It isn't just the cost of buying the equipment. There's going to be cost for maintaining it and for retrieving it. And how is it used in PRA? requests because there's case law on that and how it's put out there. So, while I appreciate the need to look at new technology, it's a lot more involved than it appears to be than just putting up the plate scanners. So, but the lieutenant and I will continue that conversation along with his superiors at the Sheriff's Department.
I know Judy wants to go on her slideshow about public safety, but I'm just going to shoot some holes in it and let everybody know that this was the highlight of the Public Safety Task Force, right? It wasn't police or marine, or wasn't fire or marine services. So, Lori had a point about the investigator, and I don't know if anybody's paying attention, but Lieutenant Peters is sitting in the back there, not with a happy look on his face. So I'm going to speak on behalf of him until he walks up to the podium to stop me. He's not supportive of reducing the investigators down from 1. I don't think he's going to be supportive of reducing his overtime budget by this amount and adding 2 full-time deputy positions. That being said, I recognize, just like Mr. Schwartz pointed out last week, that we're up here making delicious sausage. And with that sausage, I would recommend that we move forward with a modified version of this, which would be that we add a full-time deputy, which would be that deputy that Steve and I spoke about, which is for trails and beaches. Emphasis on trails, less so on beaches. And that would be our 1 full-time deputy, and then that would be less impactful to his overtime because, as he stated, the Public Safety Task Force overtime is where he gets a lot of his specialty work done. So when he came in here, he hit the ground running and was able to do a lot of good work with that overtime budget with his trip enforcement. And then I would make a recommendation that we increase the remaining overtime budget out of what we determined to be our surplus budget at the end of this evening. Because, as he stated, he did a lot of good work with that overtime where you can target specific issues and concerns. So while talking about increasing beats is amazing, I'm not going to entertain a $1.2 million increase, obviously, or like even larger than that after Judy raised the number to $260. So
I just have to say, I have a hard time philosophically paying for programs and services with overtime and doing it through overtime. I just want to be upfront with that. That's not the way that I was taught and trained to do budgeting and to do this job. We live within our means, and using overtime is not a proper use to do programs and services. We should hire the staff that we need to do those programs and services that we want to accomplish. But I will follow the council lead, and ultimately it's your decision, but I just need to say that and be upfront with it.
Well, James, on that point, I philosophically agree with you 100%. The issue with this is I'm not sitting here in a green shirt with a gold badge. And so he's my specialty officer in this, and he's telling me that that's how he needs to run the city. But I completely agree with your point that philosophically it doesn't make sense. I couldn't agree more, in fact.
I can get comfortable directionally with what you're proposing, but back to the investigative unit, Matrix, that was the weak point in the whole program, and I know it's not, it could potentially be a dollar and cents solution if we get more disciplined in closing cases, if we get more realistic in defining what are active cases, that might free up some talent to be redeployed. So as part of going forward, I really would like that to be looked at because Matrix was extremely clear on that being a deficit in our system.
I would say I think I appreciate that. I think it's important that that's something when we deliberated on, it's the way the county operates their cases. So it's not just secular to San Clemente, it's the whole Orange County Sheriff's Department as it relates to that. And, you know, the example, and I talked to Richard Brady a few months ago with regards to that, is cases that have been open for 5 years that chances are will never be solved should be closed and freed up for cases that can be. But I'm always sensitive to the public because, you know, I'll use a very simplistic example of a kid getting their bike stolen and that case remains open, but chances are that will never get solved. To the parents of that child who had their bike stolen, it's the most important thing in their life at that point in time, and they want to see closure and they want to see, you know, the bad person caught. But from a realistic standpoint, it's difficult, and so I understand. But it would be something that we could speak to when the Matrix study lands with the 34 contract cities, or the 13 contract cities, excuse me, with regards to those types of improvements within the Orange County Sheriff's Department. And then if I can address Mayor Pro Tem's comment about our operating position. I've always said we need to be between $500,000 and $1 million, and we're at $196,000 this year. So I just give you that caution because the decisions will be harder in the future years for this council to deliberate on as it relates to the budget as we approach deficits. So I just give that cautionary warning. But again, take direction from the council.
Are we ever going to get a reprieve from these cost increases?
No.
No,
you're not.
But here's the problem is that it wasn't like this. It wasn't like this the first few years. It was like 3%. For Lori, come back there.
You brought up at the beginning of the budget session the discussion about pensions and the rising cost to that. And until the county gets a handle on their pension problem and that they haven't managed all that well, and as they change their actuarial assumptions and their rates of return and everything, it's just going to keep on going up. I mean, last year, and I don't want the deputies to take this the wrong way, but the county gave out a compensation package to the deputies, and then there was comments about, well, we didn't know what the impact would be. And we didn't know there would be an impact to the cities. We knew that. Eric and I were concerned about it. We brought it up, but it's the way it is. So I think we showed you at the beginning the increases, the proposed increases that we've been hit with for the past 5-6 years, and I just don't see it getting any better. Maybe the matrix study that the contract cities are doing will shed some light on it and maybe find a way that we can save some money, but I'm not that optimistic about it. But on the flip side, we're at 46% of our general fund budget for public safety.
47.
Next year will be 47.
Next year we'll be at 48. And you can make an argument that we're in a pretty good spot with that percentage. There are cities out there that are at 60, 65% of their general fund budget. And so that's a credit to the service that we do get from the Orange County Sheriff's Department and from the Orange County Fire Authority and from our lifeguards. So we're at 47% versus 60, 65. Some cities are at 70 and getting worse. So, but at some point, to your comment, Tim, about the Mendoza line, what is our Mendoza line? Is it 50%? Is it 55%? Is it 60%?
We're going to be 50% in 2 years.
Yes.
I mean, there is just to keep it all in perspective, there is a point where home values will not increase anymore. There is a point where our jobs that's not, what the party can't keep going, right? And so, it's fun. This is actually way more fun than it was when I first got on council. When I first got on council, this budget process was a death march. It was awful because of the decisions, and it was previous to it was way worse. And so, this is a lot more fun figuring out how to deal with these increases. But I'm looking for a solution. I'm looking for some optimism, and I'm not finding what that would be like. I'm deeply grateful for the services rendered and the fact that we are at that percentage, and I brag about that when I'm chatting with residents about it. But I'm very aware that in the next 15 years we could be in the mid-60s. That's an entirely possible scenario under this issue, and we would look at like a very different city in that regard.
And as you guys consider this, we have a slide for a little bit later in the program. We've gone from 213 employees on the city side to 200 employees. So we've done. Over the past 10 years, we've been trimming and trimming and trimming. As positions come vacant, we don't fill them, and we do more with less. So that's just kind of the theme, and we've been working hard to maintain that. But the sheriffs do a great job. I actually thought the matrix study would say something different than it did, but here we are. So.
If I could add one thing to the discussion, the $196,000 operating position we have, these are the good times. we're in the height of the good times. Property values are high, everything's, new development. We've had all this stuff added in, and we're at this small operating position. That's an operating position for bad times. So if we can't increase that right now, it's a concern going forward because, the chances are, as you say, home prices aren't going to continue, and that position is just going to get tighter. So I would have liked to have seen more of a staying around $1 million each year right now while we are in the good times, so that we have some ability when the bad times come to absorb it. This year, it's not showing that right now.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we've been able to maintain a reasonable number based upon eliminating positions both in staffing as well as in public safety. I think we're hitting an impasse on that. We have a considerable growth in our population. We have a considerable growth in just basic land mass to cover as far as patrols go. And we're cycling now after a couple years of the state doing everything they can to dump more problems onto the local cities and regions. So I just think we're heading to a huge collision, and it's going to be taking some very we're going back to the difficult times of your older days and having to deal with making hard decisions, but that's what we're going to have to do.
Kathy?
One of the concerns I have is I think the matrix, or what your public safety task force showed, is administratively the more needed to be done in the sheriff's department, and I'm not seeing that in this budget. Administrative help.
Oh, I can speak to that.
I think that was in one of the slides.
Correct. There was a want to, Lieutenant Peters had talked about administrative positions that had been defunded or removed from his budget or from the OCSD budget, and a want for that in the future. To be very candid, we only had money for cops, so I've had to put cops before administrative from a priority standpoint. That's why you don't see any administrative enhancements. However, it's important to note many of the administrative responsibilities, and I'll let Judy elaborate more, we've taken on. So, for instance, the RSVPs are administered by Human Resources now versus the county because of indemnification issues, and there's other things that Judy can speak to.
The hours of the office hours downstairs have been cut back. I can't tell you exactly what they are now, but I know over the last several years we've closed earlier or closed on all Fridays, that type of thing. There's smaller things. We handle petty cash here. We handle the budgeting up here, things like that. So, the RSVPs, as Eric mentioned.
So some of the administrative duties have been alleviated off of them, so they're not doing the same things with less people. We've taken some of them on. So just as a FYI.
The second question I have, to your point, you were talking about only funding one deputy position, but using the rest in overtime. Is that correct?
So one of Chief Peters' concerns is that by adding 2 full-time deputies from the overtime budget, it cuts his overtime budget to, over half, which would be detrimental to the level of service that he's been trying to provide to the citizens of San Clemente. So by meeting in the middle, I think we come out with a much better position, and like I said previously, adding some money from our surplus at the end of this, even though it is pretty small.
More money.
Yeah.
Even though you're taking away one of the deputy positions.
So we're going to be adding 1 full-time deputy to a position, which would be Trails and Beach full-time. And then that would give another $260 back to the overtime budget. When you talk to Chief Peters, you get a real sense that some of these increased issues that Steve outlined and other issues around the community can be addressed directly with overtime. So if you see an influx of crime in this area, you can address it and say, hey, guys, day shift, you want to hang over for night shift? Let's get 3 guys out there and target this area.
Well, that's what I think I want to hear is why not hire the second deputy position to be flexible and cover those positions. That's what I'm
So you get a deputy for 3.5 days a week, right? And he's going to work a 12-hour shift 3.5 days a week. So his schedule is set, as opposed to if Lieutenant Peters sees an issue, right? He can say, make a phone call in an hour and say, hey, I need 3 guys that are willing to work this evening's shift. As opposed to that extra full-time deputy, he's just set Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, whatever it may be.
And they can't be flexible?
No, that's not how that works.
Last question. I didn't hear anything about response times. being considered in how we're going to fund, what it's going to do to response times, because I think that was one of the issues with the public. It wasn't covered that way in this.
No, we didn't, okay. Response time was always part of our communication and discussions in the task force as far as reaching to conclusions as what we thought we needed. So yeah, it was part of the scenario and part of the talk, but we didn't look at it to be a tracking key. In other words, because it's really tough to track. It's a lot of it is ancillary as far as who was going what or what was happening then, and sometimes it's at that moment what's going on. But overall, yes, we do need to improve response time, and behind that was by adding more deputies, we can get to a better response time, but more having more patrols.
I'm just wondering what happens to that response time if you're not hiring the 2 full-time deputies.
Well, if we got a slot still being filled by overtime, then if we have a body to respond to a call, that's really the problem.
Let's take a second and hear from the professional himself.
I'd like to hear about response times and how this is going to be used. Because that's what we're going to hear from people. You know, it took 7 minutes to get to a call instead of 5, and you don't have enough deputies.
Welcome, Chief.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite. So as far as things go, I was just talking to James. He actually asked me if I wanted to come up here. And I said no. First off, I appreciate James's honesty. Very much upfront and honest about everything that's been going on. If I may break down a little bit, just some plus and minuses, operationally speaking, from my perspective. I know you guys have your deliberation. But if we break down the community services officer, the removal of that position, the irony of this is getting a parking individual, somebody to handle parking and traffic accidents at the pay that they get for what they get from the public. It's difficult to find people, and then it's difficult to get those people through backgrounds. I literally had a vacancy for a year until Eric came to me and said, hey, let's cut that position and do a community policing, a crime prevention specialist. Then I get one through background. It's just the way it goes. If we cut that position, the CSOs, they do about a third of the traffic accidents. So if you take down a traffic accident, a third of them, last year we had 75 traffic accidents. So let's just take 25 of those traffic accidents. The injury, I see, sir. No. Injury traffic accidents. An injury traffic accident takes a motor or a CSO, somebody with extra skills for dealing with accident report writing. It takes them approximately 2 hours to write that report. A normal deputy, such as what I was, 3 to 4. There's a ton of graphs, there's a ton of schematics, there's a ton of east to west curb line, and it's horrible. The non-injury, there was 238. So if we broke that down, we're looking at about, around 79 hours of report writing. Takes a motor or a CSO about an hour to write it, a regular deputy about 2. CSOs make half what deputy sheriffs make. So I will be pulling sworn staff off the street to write those reports. It is what it is. So they'll be in-house writing reports a lot longer and at more expense. Positives, the position's very difficult to fill. It's very difficult to fill somebody to take what they take on a daily basis for writing parking tickets. Now to the crime prevention specialist. Negatives, current crime prevention specialist, Brittany, is killing it. Tuesday, Thursdays, she's restarted our neighborhood watch program. It's monthly meetings. She's doing phenomenal. And it will take me a while to find a qualified candidate to flow into that position. So I'm going to have a vacancy in that position. Positives?
We're going from part-time to full-time, so you say she can't do full-time.
My fault. Negatives. She cannot do full-time. She's a mom. She's a working mom, and so she can't. So I'll lose her.
So she can't find someone to job share with her?
No. Her husband is also with our department. So they don't have a lot of family around, and she already uses family for the days that she's here.
No, but another part-time person to job share with her. She can't.
Within
she
the
can't find
county,
one?
that's rough. That's rough. That being said, my goal would be to keep Brittany at least either part-time or extra help, at least through the first phases of getting a full-time crime prevention specialist, if not keep her indefinitely. Her knowledge, what she's done for our neighborhood watch since I've been here a year, is pretty incredible. She stepped it up, and she's done great work. Now, the big one, the $500,000 for 2 deputy sheriffs. So currently, and believe me, I am not to Judy or Eric's standards as far as numbers go. I think I barely made it through high school. That being said, Deputy 2 gets 288 hours per year per position, which equates to about 11 hours per pay period. That's if there's 26 pay periods, which typically there is. So each deputy, if you broke it down that way, it's about 11 hours. With this scenario, break it down the same way, it works out to 113 hours per position, which equates to 4 hours of deputy sheriff overtime per position. Let me break down overtime. Sick, vacation, military leave, maternity leave, admin leave, work comp, court, shift extension, special assignment, special event. All of those things fall into overtime. Deputy sheriffs work a 3-12 schedule with an 8-hour makeup. Most of our deputies willingly stay over 4 hours on their 8-hour to help cover the city. They do a phenomenal job of helping each other out and staying on. That 4-hour stay over would evaporate my overtime by itself. So training, we typically will send people to training on overtime rather than send them on straight time and backfill them with overtime. In other words, I'm saving money by sending people on training to overtime. All of these things my overtime would blow through so quickly. Not to mention the special events, not to mention some of the other things we talked about. All of those work into that overtime. And it would be very difficult to work under those circumstances. Now, a little quick history, if I may. I know that the city has dropped personnel, 13, correct, out of the 200. So I've dropped 8 out of 57. So it's a big drop. It's a huge drop. Last time we actually added a position was in the 8-9 contract, and I went from 43 to 44 sworn. I had 13 professional staff, total of 57 positions. Since then, we steadily declined. 14-15, we went from 44 to 43 sworn. 9-10, the decline of the professional staff started from 13 to 6 to 14 to 49.9 now. As Judy said, the population has risen tremendously. 15,000 in San Clemente since 2000. That's when I was on patrol here. 2,000 in San Juan and 1,000 in Dana Point. Our population has grown tremendously since 2000. So, knowing all this and coming into what we're coming into, we're already seeing the effects of 109, of AB 109 and Prop 47. We're already seeing those effects. Next, 57. We don't know what that brings. I prepared something to read just in case I came up, if I may. Just in case. I look at my staffing like a bucket of water. Now, I don't feel the bucket is anywhere near the level it should be, but the water's nice and calm. Everyone knows what has to be done, and they're doing their best to get it done. At least we know where the problems are and what resources we have to put on those problems. Now, what you're proposing, what this is proposing, it will not help me. In fact, the plan is really just removing a cup of water and slamming it back into the bucket. You're not adding any water, but you are causing turbulence. If it is possible to increase my staffing without disrupting operations, I would be eternally grateful. However, with the limited knowledge I have of your overall budget and the directions which you hope to go with it, I don't see a true increase being feasible. So here's my hope. I humbly ask you to let me maintain my current situation until the time comes that we can truly increase the safety of the city and financially be able to do it. Just leave me alone. Let me run my operations as I'm running them and go with it from that point. When you start right now, we're as lean as we're going to get. And we will continue to limp ahead and continue to do what we need to do within the city out of pure pride. But you have to let us do that. By taking that cup of water and slamming it back in there and hoping something else happens, it's going to cause more problems than it does good. As far as the investigations go, the next closest city to us in investigated cases is Mission Viejo. They have a lot more population, I believe 30,000 more in population, and they were 400 less cases than we were. That is why I do not want to cut an investigator, because I have 400 cases more than the closest city. That being said, we are working to fix the statistical data that the matrix located. We have a dashboard now where I can actually see who's got cases, how many are assigned, where they are in those cases. I can actually see the P1, P2, P3. I can see it. As soon as I can master it, I'll be providing statistical data to you. I don't have anybody to grab that data. It takes me a little while to figure it out. Like I said, I'm lucky I got through high school. That being said, Matrix pointed that out as a negative. I agreed with them, and we're working on fixing that. It's the producing stats to show relevance and justify the positions that we were lacking in. And since I've been here a year and been whining to the computer people, I think we've accomplished that.
So, can you talk about response times?
Mm-hmm. The sheriff mandates that priority 1 response times will be below 5 minutes. Everything else has increased. Priority 2, priority 3, priority 4, everything else has increased. What does that mean? Okay, a priority 1 call, a domestic violence, a 911 hang-up, most of our nighttime calls are priority 1 calls. If you get 2 or 3 priority calls in a night, you can zap your resources. So a quick look at those resources, when the call comes out, the next one calls out, if it's a priority 2 or priority 3, it might be put off until this one is safe. At the moment, we are holding in at the 5-minute mark per the sheriff's direction at 5 minutes. But our other ones, our P2s, our P3s, and our P4s, they are growing. Will one officer help me with that? I've had 25 years of personnel decreases and lots of increases in population. One officer is not going to change my response times here or there. One officer will not. That being said, as we talked about the beach patrol, I'm a believer in getting full-time personnel, as what James was saying. But in hearing the budget, it's not feasible. It's not feasible to do that. It doesn't appear that there's anything to do it. So I will continue to do the beach with overtime and continue to push James's patience by pushing that overtime balance. But the bottom line is, it's easier for me to get, if all of a sudden we have a spike on Mondays on the beach, I can throw an overtime shift at it, but adjusting, as Mr. Ham said, but adjusting a person's schedule, I have to give them a 2-week notice. There's a lot of FSLA laws in regards to how I can maneuver my people. So overtime is easy for me to say, we're having a spike in thefts on Mondays. Let's do it. Send a body down there for the next 3 Mondays.
Question is, what if we left the budget alone, but added a beach trails quad patrol, one position, to rotate around where needed on a regular basis? Would that affect what you're talking about as far as potential? Do you think that would make any impact at all?
Well, yeah, it's going to make an impact on the quality of life issues that we've been having. You know, the our deputies spend a lot of time in certain areas of our city that are frequented by folks that don't have a home. And they spend a lot of time on that. If we had a full-time deputy and I put him to work Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays, your job is to hit North Beach, hit the canyons, hit Calafia, hit these areas where we're having these issues and see what you can do as well as enforce. But again, as Mr. Ham stated, that's a 312 position. I establish their hours, that's when they work their hours. So any help would help. I would never turn down a deputy sheriff to be reassigned to the beach and the canyons. It would be light would shine upon me. But that being said, I know where the position you're in. I see it.
Thank you.
Chief, I'm struggling with the, because I've heard, I mean, obviously from the community for yourself, that staffing is lean and that we're doing more with less, but I'm struggling with just the overall cost increases over the past 4 years. First few years, we were, fire department and sheriff's department were right in pair in terms of that cost increases. And then it just has accelerated so much over the past few years that even if we had the opportunity, and you even said it, we started cutting personnel, we started doing all these things to try and get to the point where we could at least sustain services at a level. And, it's not, let me put it this way, it's not something we desired or wanted to happen, but ultimately is, we've gone from, I think it was when I first started, around 45% of our budget was public safety. Now we're, no, it was 44, I think, and now we've jumped up to 47%. I'm just concerned about those cost increases and how do we manage it with the services, because you're under a very stressful job, and we're also managing a finite resource. So I don't know. It's like an immovable force, and it's that challenge. How do we reconcile that as a council? How do we approach this philosophically? Because we obviously want to make sure that the sheriff's department is happy, they're compensated, but we once we start getting into the mid-60s on our budget costs, it's catastrophic, frankly, to a community.
I think that's why some of the communities are calling King's X on. They can't do it anymore. The ones that are at 60, they don't quite have the revenue that we do, and so that's why I think we're under 50. If we were them, we would be right up there with them with these costs.
So anyway, that's what I'm just kind of asking you philosophically. How would we approach that as a council? Because the community is, more deputies. But you've seen the budgeting, and what's the answer to that?
Boy, that's a big.
That's a big
question.
one.
Thanks for that, sir.
Yeah. What's the meaning of life? Tell me. Yeah.
Boy, since I've come down here, I've done everything I can to touch the community and stay in close with my other department heads, you folks, and everybody, and work within this group. And so this is a tough question. From your position, you just have to decide what are the priorities of the city and how does it work. I do look for you to just. I know that we like to lump everything under public safety. I'd love for the public take a look at any of the budgets for any of the other cities and just compare police services with police services. Just any city you want, pick it. It can be a contract city, it can be a municipality. A lot of those questions that are answered out there, they'll answer them themselves. Why can't we do our own PD? Take a look at it. Look at the other sheriff's contract cities. What part is police services? What part isn't? Don't look at public safety. Look at police services. That being said, sir, I can't even imagine having to do your job. I have enough problems doing my own. I don't want any part of yours. So,
that's a good question. That is a good question, and that's why we're doing what we do. Well,
that's why you get paid the big bucks,
yes,
sir.
Yes. Well, we appreciate your candor on this. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, sir.
Okay.
I'd like to know more about the CSO. You're saying that without the CSO,
it's funny
not
when
function.
this is one of those situations when logic comes into me. When Eric brought the idea to me to say, "Hey, I'll get you another crime prevention specialist. You want to give up that vacant CSO spot?" it's one of these things that's really hard as a logical person to say, I haven't filled the thing for a year. So how do I exactly justify its existence when I haven't been able to fill it? And the person in charge of our hiring and firing at PSD heard me a lot over the past 8 months, to the point that the day Eric came to me was the day one cleared background, which was just ironic to itself. The only reason I point out the benefits of the CSO is so you recognize what's happening. I won't argue the cut of the CSO to add a crime prevention specialist, because either way I benefit. The city, on the other hand, if that position is full, benefits monetarily from a CSO. They do not benefit monetarily from a crime prevention specialist. However, they do benefit through the education of the public. So there's a give and take, but you guys are talking dollars and cents. And as far as dollars and cents go, you'll benefit more from a CSO. But as far as I'm concerned, if a CSO is cut and I get a crime prevention specialist, it benefits me either way.
I'll just clarify on the CSO, and the lieutenant can correct me if I'm wrong. We're currently at 4 budgeted positions for community services officer. Their two primary responsibilities are parking and I'll say deputy support in regards to report writing.
Accident writing.
And one of the things that we have seen is we've seen a decrease in parking enforcement, especially from the revenue standpoint, and that could be because they're doing more support for the deputies with report writing. As we've mentioned in the Public Safety Task Force and at our previous council meeting, I think we had that discussion, we're going to be bringing back a proposal for private parking enforcement for citywide parking lots. And so one of the things that I would make the comment as, you know, that responsibility would be alleviated from the Orange County Sheriff Department's standpoint. So they wouldn't have to do that anymore in terms of parking enforcement in public parking lots. And so, you know, monetarily, we don't see, you know, there were days when we would see more revenue, but we're seeing less revenue as it relates to parking enforcement. So I just put that out there that, you know, there's not a lot of monetary gain from adding a CSO from a revenue standpoint. And if, for example, when we used to have motors, we would attribute about $70,000 to motors as it relates to traffic violation revenue. But, you know, obviously we're down to 2 motors currently.
So I'll wrap this thing up onto a position that's going to be palatable for the 2 remaining minority council members here. I'm going to call Steve and I the majority council members since Lori's absent. I'm going to move that we recommend Chief Peters' lackluster request, which is leave me alone. And then I'm going to hope for Steve's support on this, being that there's a guarantee that he and I will be here next year, and that I want to direct staff to bring back an additional deputy next year, next year's budget.
Can we take a break and maybe think about this? Well, not that we discuss it, right? There's no discussion that's going to happen outside the public purview. I'd like to think about this, because isn't it a lot?
Can you take a meal break?
Yeah, I'm going to take a 30-minute break, bathroom, meal, real quick. Oh.
Maybe we could just finish this public safety, because there's the other pieces that might impact.
It might help.
Can we get through?
Some of what they're saying, or what we're adding, might
Okay,
help with what you're
so we'll
doing.
just, all right, well, yes, yeah, let's go through
All
it.
right.
Chief, we'll kind of reconvene after the meeting to make a decision on this.
Okay. Only because I just want to make sure that we have in mind what's coming in fire and we've mentioned it before, but I just want to make sure before you make any decisions. So fire and ambulance services, $10 million in total. The OCFA-based contract will increase by about 4.5%. That's the maximum allowed in the contract, so it's $372,000. There's, again, no service level increase for this number. This is just status quo. Care ambulance services, our contract reflects a $72,000 increase to $1.2 million. It's a little complicated, but overall the total program increase is $94,000, and that's because the current fiscal year we had a mix of both care and then OCFA was here for 3 months. And so while the care contract is a $72,000 year over year, the budget changes by $94,000 because of that. And that continues to provide 2 full-time ambulances. The piece that I want to remind everyone is the 4th firefighter. It's a 3-person rotation, so we say 4th firefighter, but it's really 3 positions that are added to the budget. This is year 2 of that implementation. Years 1 and 2 are funded by OCFA, so we have not seen any budget impact from this. The costs will begin to be phased in next fiscal year with 3 overtime positions, and then it'll phase in over several more years until 2025. At the end of it all will be another $780,000 annually that we will need to pay for fire services. And so this is kind of just a little graphic. If you see the fiscal year in the first column, and then OCFA cost share and San Clemente cost share. So the first couple years, the first year was a little over a year, actually, it was a year and a couple months, but 3 overtime positions for those first 2 years, and then it goes to 2 overtime, one to San Clemente, and then that switches, and then over time, you'll see that all of them are paid by the city to the point where we'll stop doing overtime and go to regular positions. This, by the way, is based on a 2% salary and benefit increase factor for OCFA. You know, it's a lot of years between here and now, so who knows what that factor will be. It could be more, could be less, but that's the percentage we have now. So I just want to remind everyone that that's another thing that we have to incorporate in our budget over the next several years. And I think, and then this is really pretty much the end of things. Our fund balance, 12.733, that's 20% of our operating expenditures. That's what our fiscal policy states, and that's best practices. And then we have an unassigned fund balance of about $3.3 million. And then this is our 5-year forecast. This year, the $0.2 million, that $200,000 we're talking about. Next year, we're anticipating about a negative $100,000 that we're going to have to find funding for, and then you can see that grow in the next several years based on all these things we've been talking about, the increases that continue to happen, the revenues kind of leveling off, the 4th firefighter, and the pension costs. So that's what our next kind of 5 years at this point looks like. And I think, you know, I'm going to stop there. If we want to take a break, that was all of the general fund, so I just want to make sure that you saw all that.
Let's take a break. 20 minutes enough?
Yeah, sure.
Let's go to 6:50. Thank you, Judy. listening to goofy folk music. Let's get this rolling.
You didn't put on the mic?
Sunshine, since I don't know when. Well, I'm stuck in Folsom Prison. Time keeps rolling on.
Jack strenuously. All right, let's get rolling. Judy?
All right, so I think what would be best is let me finish the presentation, and then at the end we'll have the questions and we can discuss. So I'm going to move on from the general fund, and I just have a couple slides on the other funds, because we tend to forget that we have other funds. So our water and sewer funds, these are just highlights. There was a water cost of service study completed in 17-18. A new rate structure was implemented. It's rather than a tiered structure, it's a uniform structure. I have your water rates increased 16.8%. That's actually the fixed cost, and that's amounts to about $3 per unit. The actual commodity costs will increase, but it's based on whether you are a low user or a high user in terms of what your percentage increase will be. But I've been told that in total about 9% is what an average customer will see as an increase in their water rates. Sewer rates are not increasing in this budget. However, a sewer cost of service study is supposed to be completed in the coming year, and then we'll see where that lands in terms of rates. There's one budget enhancement, replace a portable water quality disinfection unit at the water plant. And then the Clean Ocean Fund, there's a couple of budget enhancements there. 2 rugged tablet devices, and the Environmental Interns program continues in this year. For our special revenue funds, again, these are just a few highlights, but just want to mention the Street Improvement Fund, Measure M2 funds provide ongoing revenue source. So it's about $986,000 for the coming year. And then the general fund contributes annually about $756,000, and we'll be doing that again next year. In the gas tax fund, we have 4 projects at $2.9 million. One of those is a $1.3 million for arterial street pavement maintenance. In the air quality improvement fund, we continue the San Clemente trolley operation and $120,000 budget for the city's portion of the city share for those. And then the traffic calming program budget's $80,000. And I remind you, we have a police grants fund, and we receive about $100,000 a year that funds a portion of one deputy position, and we anticipate that again in the coming year. And so that is all I have on the budget. The next item is the capital improvement program, and Ken Natz was going to come up and speak to that. Ken?
So before Ken goes, when is it that we want to dive back into those public safety and provide some direction?
At the conclusion of this, then we'll be seeking direction on a couple of decision packages, and at that time we'll be seeking direction, and we'll bring it back to you with regards to public safety.
I mean, I love hearing from Ken. I just don't want to delay that opportunity at all. So let's do this.
I was challenged to 5 minutes or less. So
okay.
See if I can do it.
I like these challenges. Can we challenge Councilmember Schwartz to the same?
So good evening, Mayor, Council members. Ken Natz, Principal Civil Engineer. I'll be discussing the capital improvement program tonight. Before we jump into the proposed budget, just going to take a couple minutes to run you through a few projects that we've completed over the last year. This map represents various disciplines of work that are going on in the city. It doesn't represent all the projects, but just a quick cross-section of various projects in those major 6 categories. I'm going to run through them. It'll take me about 60 seconds. So at our treatment plant, we have the water reclamation plant splitter box rehabilitation. Total project cost of $1.85 million. Another one at the treatment plant, our booster outfall pipeline that conveys our treated sewage to the Dana Point ocean outfall, a repair for $313,000. Obviously, if you live in San Clemente or driving around, you've noticed all the major street improvements going on, total of $2.63 million in major street arterial improvements. Obviously, usual suspect, slurry seal work that goes on to maintain the condition of our pavement so we don't need to grind and overlay good condition pavement. We can just keep it moving on. $250,000. Improvements to our schools, Safe Route to School program. This project was a total of $1.2 million. Approximately $1 million was from grant funds. It included widened sidewalks, striping, and bulb outs for better student access. Energy efficiency improvements in street LEDs. Obviously, these help the community and help the city comply with our general plan dark sky policies. for $260,000. Lastly, but certainly not least, the water system improvements. We have a few of these projects going on this year, $875,000 at Presidente, and then we did about $2 million worth of work at Marblehead Inland. So a big year in water. There's another water project, pressure reducing stations for $325,000. And last, but certainly not least, a project of the pier for a total of $1.96 million that included rehab of the pier as well as the undercarriage bird deterrent netting that went in. That project is substantially complete and wrapping up. So we'll jump right into next year's budget. This represents all the various projects you can see sprinkled throughout the city. Refer to page 196 in your budget book. It has this breakdown, total budget of $13.2 million, 25 major projects subdivided in those major categories. We brought this forward to the Planning Commission last week, and they certified it in compliance with the general plan. In addition, the budget also includes 25 maintenance projects for a total of $4.9 million. Again, pages 194 and 198 through 198 have some of the highlights with regards to those projects. And I'm just going to take a quick snapshot here through each one of our 6 major categories and walk you through. This will identify all the various projects in these funds. The drainage projects, total of 2 projects for $900,000. I can delve into these if there's any questions. Otherwise, I'll move on to our parks and medians.
I have a question on Vaquero.
Yes.
Was that on this one? I thought
It
Vaquero
is.
was like $1.5 million. Is that 2 different projects on that? Hold on.
Well, Vaquero, you're thinking of the street rehabilitation project that went on
Yes.
Vaquero? This is a drainage project
Thank
that went
you.
on Vaquero?
Sorry about that.
No problem.
I
This
saw
is
Vaquero and wanted to stop you. Okay. Go on.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Feature.
Sorry about that.
No problem. So I've linked all the project sheets into the presentation. You can see here the various page numbers. I'm going to skim through them again. Parks and Median, 6 projects for a total of $1.06 million. I can skim through these really quick. Any questions? I'll just move on to the next category, which is sewer. We have 9 projects for a total of $3.7 million. They're included here on this listing. And then next up, streets, 16 projects for a total of $7 million. You can see those sprinkled throughout the city on that map. Obviously, big pavement alley improvements and miscellaneous maintenance and other projects in the streets category as well. Then moving on to water projects, not as many as those. 8 projects for a total of $1.8 million. Those are on budget pages 247 to 256. And then if there's no questions on those, we have last category of facilities, pages 257 through 267 of your budget. 10 projects for a total of $3.7 million. Just want to point out one thing that's presented in this budget, which is a decision by staff recently. We've evaluated one of the projects in this category, which is the Aquatic Center shade structure replacement. Staff's deeming right now that we can provide a couple more additional years of useful life out of those, so we're going to go ahead and remove that project from the budget. So besides that little edit, the budget as it stands before you, total of $18.1 million, 50 projects. I'd be happy to answer any questions the council might have.
I have a quick question. One of the projects was replacing the plaster on the pool at Vista Hermosa
Yes.
with a more durable plaster. So my question is, how did we do the Ole Hansen pool? Do you know?
I do not know off the top of
Okay.
my head. I'm not sure if there's anybody here who knows the answer to that question.
I was just curious.
Randy Little, I'm the maintenance manager. Good evening. The Ole Hansen pool was done with the same product that we plan on using at the Aquatic Center. It's failed. It's got major spalding throughout below the water line on all 3 pools, the play pool, the activity pool, as well as the lap pool. So it's just not holding up. The Ole Hansen pools are doing really well. We just inspected them. They're holding up fairly well from the coating. So we're going to use the same product.
Okay. All right, that's what I wanted to know, is your opinion of the pool, the other pool. Thank you.
We just no. Tell me about that. No, I would tell me about the shade structure again. It's 120,000. We can get a few more years out of it. Is that what you're thinking?
That's my understanding. That project came into our CIP project stakeholder group initially. We went through prepared our draft budget. We recently were discussing the projects last week, kind of as a final quality control, and it was determined that project really wasn't needed this time. So what we're recommending is that we're going to project it in our out years, and so we'll make that change and reflect it in the facilities and other category in the 6-year plan.
Okay. Any questions for Ken? Ken, the CIP nets.
I was going to say, every time Ken gets up, he always delivers.
Brings
very
the heat.
short and concise.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Ham.
Yeah. Yeah.
And expensive. Well.
Ken, bringing the heat. Thank you, sir. We sure appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I want to thank Ken, too. The presentation that he just gave, the links with the project sheets are all in there. And that's great to have that way and to be able to pull those up. And so that's great work that you did.
If I may, just for the council, that came from our Esri GIS software, and so it was a goal of ours about a year ago to bring that forward to the council. We didn't achieve that goal last year's presentation. It was very difficult. I'd like to thank my staff member, Jake Ohana, our senior engineering technician, for really kind of helping me put the meat and potatoes together in the presentation.
That's cool. Thank you.
Okay, so really the last thing that we have here to talk about are 2 city council decision items. And so these 2, as well as the determinations, any other direction that you want to give on other items is what we would want to close here. So let me just mention these 2 so that we can put them on the table. Both of these are considered one-time expenses, so these would not impact our operating position. They are one of them, the Mercy House contract for homeless shelter services. And both of these, by the way, are printed on yellow paper. And so in the very, very front section of your book, at the very end, you'll see 2 yellow sheets. And that's where the information on these 2 projects is. So let me just talk about this one. So this is the Mercy House contract. It's a one-time item. It's a contract for mobile outreach services for the homeless, and that's a very succinct description. There's more detail into what they actually provide. The cost for this, for the 1-year cost, would be $75,000. And then the second decision package is actually split between 2 funds, and it's the Camino de las Mares median landscaping. Again, this is a one-time item to landscape on that median. It's for rehabilitation of deficient landscaping and putting in drought-tolerant landscaping to conserve water and reduce water costs. So the total cost for the project is $280,000, split $140,000 in the general fund and $140,000 in the water conservation fund. And we have staff who could answer questions if you have any on either of those items.
Judy, real quick, you have funding for both these items?
Yes, because it's one-time money, so it would come out of our unassigned fund balance. Yes. So those are the 2 items. We'd already opened the public hearing, so we don't need to do that because it's still in process. So I guess at this time, I'm just looking for council direction on those 2 items, as well as anything else you want to provide.
And this would be where you also address public safety if you wanted to give us direction.
Sure. Any cards? Nothing? 1? Okay, please bring it up.
They already spoke.
Well, they already spoke.
Thank you. Adrian Marks, please come on up.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm a little disappointed. I'm, as far as I know, the only one here of the many people that have been concerned with the shortage in the police force. Everything I've been hearing online, I expected to see more people here to talk about this. Clearly, me sitting here tonight and getting a better understanding of the budget, there's a lot of expense that goes into making our city safe, and it is a big concern for all of us that live here. I know that at one of the previous meetings I attended, somebody had recommended or mentioned the fact that both the state and the county have talked about all these funds that they have that are directly related to this homeless crisis. And there's so much activity happening here that is a direct result of that. So I was curious if there has been any work to look into the county and state funds that are available to see how we can get those allocated to our city to help with these additional expenses, especially in the police services area. So I just wanted, I guess, to bring that up again and see if there's any information that you guys can share in that regard. And as far as budget stuff goes, you know, it's not only about reducing expenses, but also different ideas to generate revenue for the city. And one idea I've had for a long time that I just don't have the time or energy to pursue myself, but maybe it's something that the city Parks and Recreation or beach area could look into. And, you know, in the summer months, the beach is so crazy, and we all go down there with all our crap that we want to have for the day while we're there, you know, tents and chairs and ice chest. And I've often said, you know, I would love to pay some kid $20 to just haul this crap down to, you know, between lifeguard, whatever, and have them pick it up when I'm ready to go, and I can drive my car to pick it up. I don't know, just an idea I'm throwing out there because I'm sure I'm not the only one who would love to fork over $20 to not have to deal with that. And I don't know, it might be an area for at least the summer months to have some extra revenue. And I forgot what else I was going to say, but thank you.
And thank you for coming out tonight. We can actually answer that question for you right now, Adrian, that you had about the county, because I've seen an email from James to the county. So we have had a significant impact from the homeless population that was placed down here. And we have made a request. James, maybe you could update the council and the community on those requests and what we've gotten out of it.
So far, we haven't gotten anything out of it, but I have had those conversations with the CEO of Orange County, of the county, Frank Kim. I've had conversations with Under Sheriff Don Barnes about that issue. Last Friday, I met with the majority of the city managers in Orange County, along with the top staff of the county, and we talked about some of those funds that have been in the media that are available for homeless services. And it turns out, after listening to the county, that, you know, they're not there for public safety expenses. They're there for housing and for mental health type functions that the county is providing. It's an ongoing conversation that the cities are having with the county. We feel it's the county's responsibility to manage the homeless problem because they do have the funds. The city doesn't have the funds. We don't receive funds for mental health or for housing from the state or from the federal government like the county does. So there's some things in the works. I can't discuss it, but the county is making some headway with some ideas that, you know, if they come to fruition, could help alleviate the homeless problem. The city attorney, myself, the police chief, Lieutenant Peters, and I have constant discussions about the homeless problem and what can be done. The criminalization of some of the different things that they do, the prosecution, whether we can get prosecution or whether we can't. And it's just a real difficult nut to crack. But it is something that, you know, is a topic of discussion, if not daily, every other day at the city. And I'm not sure that, throwing more police officers at it is the solution, or if there's another solution. But that's something we're working on with the county right now.
Adrian, I'm actually I'm also a little surprised and disappointed in a lot of ways that there aren't more folks here about this question, because based on the fervor online and the passionate opinions held by many members of our community, this is their opportunity to really understand the context behind these decisions. You know, when we look across the span of what we budget for and what revenues are, the worst possible thing we can do is to overextend the city for temporary issues, especially for long-term obligations. You don't hire an officer one year and then terminate him the next when things aren't going great. And so I do wish more folks were here. Fortunately, this is online and people will be able to see it then, and they can understand a little bit more about the budget position we're in this year and what we hope to do in years to come. But thank you for coming. Appreciate that. So we have recommendations. Judy has placed those. Public safety, I assume, is the first thing we're going to be chatting about.
Well, I was gonna suggest we streamline this process, and I'm just going to make a motion that we approve the two yellow sheets here before us. Hopefully, I'll get a second. We'll vote on them and move on.
Second.
And I'm sorry, I just really need direction, so you don't need a formal
perfect.
vote. If you're
That's
all
even
saying
easier.
included in the
Bring it
budget,
back
I'll
to
bring
the
it back.
adopted
I'll start by saying with the two items for the decision package, I have no problem supporting it.
And by the way, I think this is also useful for the community to know, and I know you covered it, but the Mercy House contribution is $75,000 this next year that is really designed to supplement our homeless outreach. That's what that line item is specifically for. And so there's more details in the budget itself, but it's a $75,000 one-time expenditure to Mercy House to assist us and engage with homeless residents and direct them towards the proper services. So I think we have direction. Kathy?
No, that's good.
You okay with that? Okay.
The next item I was going to bring up before we get to public safety is, huh?
Did you vote?
Do you want to do a vote?
Oh, did we
We
vote on
really
We
just
had
need.
a motion.
I just need.
But as long as we had the motion already on the
Okay.
floor.
So the motion was made by
Thanks, Joanne.
Approve.
Chris, seconded by Steve. We have a motion by Ham, second by Schwartz. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Passes 4-0.
And that's for both, right? To
For
include
both. Yeah.
Okay.
The next one was the first speaker we had this evening. Mr. Mudge spoke about the $6,500 cost for the one-time fee for the new jet ski for lifeguard headquarters. $6,500. So I'm going to move that we approve that item as well, so we can cover the full cost for the.
Well, the full cost is 13,000.
No,
Yeah.
the full cost is 13, so
Yeah,
we've
so an
put in
additional-
6,500. So
We
you're
don't have anything in
making
the
a
budget
motion
now.
to increase our expenditure by another $6,500.
Exactly. Yep.
But only if the capital budget, their depreciation for those vehicles get started.
Well, I was going to say, I
with
want
that
to
one.
add this to the list of vehicles so that we start calculating
We've
that
already
in
built
annually.
into their current fiscal year budget for 18-19 the replacement reserve for a
Perfect.
5-year life. So they'll start paying down that replacement reserve in fiscal year 18-19.
Okay.
So we're going to buy, we're saying fully fund for a unit now, which we expect to last 5 years.
Correct. And then already built into the budget, the replacement cost that James alluded to, because in prior grants, we don't set up replacement reserve because we look at it as a one-time. So it's in the budget for that as well.
We're putting 6,500 in because we're going to get a new, what are those giant bodyboard rescue boards called, too? I'm going to order the new ski, right?
Mr. Budge had said
Well, maybe the-
6,100. We're just wondering about the.
It's
Okay.
$13,000.
Maybe the
Well, the
committee
total-
could come up with that.
If we want to
By
fund the whole thing, we need to put 13,000 in the budget.
Yeah, so increase the budget to
Budget.
13,000. How's that sound?
Great.
That I understand.
So, can I amend, or has anyone made a motion on this yet?
Well, hold on. Let me just.
No, we're still
Fiscally, is this going to tank us? I'm kidding. I'm just wondering if it's okay.
This
Is that
is
okay?
fine.
Okay. All right. So we have a motion by.
I was just going to give direction, and then with support, I wasn't going to do another motion.
That's fine.
But,
Unless
then
Joanne's-
Unless Joanne says you need a
As
motion.
long as everybody understands, so we're increasing the budget for this
It's
to
13,000.
13,000, right?
All right.
Okay.
One-time purchase.
Council has provided that.
And giving
direction.
direction that what Eric already said is that it's already included in next year's budget for
Turn left
replacement.
at the next light, and then make 3 lefts after that.
Okay, and then the final one's the fun one, public safety.
I move yes.
Wait, no, we have to. We need that one slide.
So just to be clear, Eric said we're already addressing all these. The real question is going to be
The one that had the
deputies.
actual,
The deputies.
that one. We need that slide.
That's the one we need up there.
Listen, I'm going to have to. So let me just set the table here. James has shared his position. Lieutenant has shared his position. The two of you were on the Public Safety Task Force, and frankly, I'm going to look to you two to help us harmonize this and to get it to a point where it's going to be an acceptable thing, because you heard from the residents. I am very sensitive to the idea that we're going to walk out of this meeting without an addition, because there will be a perception, right or wrong, that we're not doing anything on this question. However, the chief has told us that the thing that would be most valuable to him is to let him alone and to have the budget as he's had it this past year. But that's the challenge ultimately. Is how do we move forward with this and trying to strike a balance that's going to be able to accommodate both.
You already know what the perception's going to be. There's not going to be a choice in it. It's going to be that we did zero, that we added zero to help with the.
I agree, but we can't worry about perceptions when we have to deal with dollars and budgets and factualities. That isn't even a word. Factual information. We have to make the right decision, and one that's going to fit within our budget guidelines, and also accomplish the public safety objectives that the lieutenant has to pursue. And so I appreciate perceptions, and I can accept the fact that maybe pilloried for what we're doing, but ultimately we're not going to go into the negative on a budget, and we're just not going to do it. Not while I'm on the council, and I know all of them feel exactly the same way. So how do we get to the point where we can allow the chief to do what he needs to do while still staying in budget? That's the question.
What I would like to try to get done possibly, I respect James' position very well, as I do the chief, and I'm kind of like in between. I believe that we all are patrol. We should actually show it. I mean, it should be disclosed. We shouldn't be finding games or other ways to get around what for our public safety and have all, fully fund and fully fill all the officers we need. But knowing that even today, if we say we have the money sitting here, go do it, it could be 2 to 6 months down the road before we're able to get a trained officer out there. And I'm still very concerned about the summer, and so I'm leaning towards what the chief was saying, as saying he's telling us that he can man up near, and I'm going to maybe put some words in his mouth, but he can accomplish close to what another shift another group might accomplish with using his overtime. And I'm thinking if we throw in that one additional beach trail quad
For summer only?
For summer only, we could, midway through it, now we'll see, with that being added and with what he's been doing with the overtime situation, and also where we are on our revenue factors, then we come to another decision point. But I would like to fully fund what his last budget, and let him do his magic with the overtime, and give him one more body with a quad to handle the overflow for the days that he feels he needs it on the trails, or which is more than likely going to be the weekends, but out on the trails or out on the out on the beach.
So to capture what you're saying is you want to add one full-time deputy position.
Yeah.
Is that accurate? And then, okay, so let me just write that down.
Let me jump in here. I think I want to clarify what Steve said. I think what Steve's saying is he wants to add a seasonal second quad unit. So it's a team
From
of
overtime.
two from overtime, which would be an increase of a third of a full-time deputy position, but at an overtime rate, which would probably be like an 8% savings. So you're looking at an increase of, was that like $90,000 or something?
But that's only for 6 months, 3 months, summertime?
For 3 months.
So, yeah.
For 3 months.
It's for the summertime until by that time we'll have the police study back from the other counties. We'll have gone through and seen where we are, and we'll have observed what the chief's been able to do with what he's asking for us to give him.
And the thought for the beach patrol officer was what? Why the need?
Well, that's exactly what we were talking about. So public safety, the biggest thing that people came and spoke about was the trails in North Beach, quite frankly,
Yeah.
the two high concern areas.
Yeah, and people visiting the town don't feel safe when they go to our beaches or walk our trails, and that's what we want to accomplish.
Eric, before we go on, I got a question for staff. Eric, what is the funded overtime budget for the sheriff's department annually?
What's the current for this current fiscal year? What's our overtime budget within the sheriff contract? You're talking about current fiscal year, correct?
Oh, 1.1.
$1,097,000.
We don't normally spend it.
$1,097,000.
However, this fiscal year, we're gonna spend it to the zero.
Yeah, because we haven't been using it to fill, we fully filled
So-
a lot
We
of
were
our
using
spots.
it to fill spots.
Listen, I like your idea, Steve. I see where you're going with it. The problem is, and staff's going to jump down our throats when we do this, if we upped it by another 97,000 and put it to 1.2 million, that brings our surplus right down to 100K even.
We can't do that.
Even.
95 because you gave 5.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Thank
Yeah.
you. Judy's so good
Thank
at
you
it.
for
We just spent
remembering that.
$6,500 for
Yeah.
a jet ski.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think we can do that. I think we can't go to that level, knowing that next year we're going to have less. Projected revenue.
We can find somewhere else.
I love negotiating against myself, so let me just try for a second here. So, Judy, what was at the mid-year budget process? Lieutenant Peters was over on his overtime budget by how much approximately? What dollar amount? Oh, thank you.
We were out of whack a lot.
Well,
At
what's
the mid-year
the-
budget.
I don't have an exact dollar amount. I have a whole sheet with all that numbers, but to give you, where we're at, it's hard to say.
I think
can tell you-
I think I've heard the council's direction, and instead of trying to work this out down to the dollar, I would prefer that you just give us direction, and we'll look at it over the next 2 weeks and come back to you with our solution or lack of solution. But we will work on it.
Let me make one recommendation. Let me make one recommendation here. So I think we are sensitive to the fact that the chief is asked to leave us alone. I do feel that we do need to add a deputy too, but he did say it's a 3 to 6 month build-up process for the recruitment for that. And so perhaps the strategy here, I mean, what you're really looking at is a half a year of a deputy. Once we bring him on board, if it is truly a 3 to 6, he starts in September, October, right? And so we're looking at a half a year of a deputy 2 position. And perhaps what we do is we, authorize him potentially with James working on it, is to start that recruitment and, find the right person, bring him on board. We're looking at a half a year of a deputy 2 position. And then we retain the half-time crime prevention specialist and then delete the CSO position and then just stick with the same overtime. And so we've got the halftime crime prevention specialist. You have a deputy 2 position being added, potentially mid-year. Sounds like it might be a little bit before it. And then we stay with the same overtime budget, and we have to figure out a way to fit that within the same cost structure. We're basically within our budget as it currently stands.
Right.
So, we're looking at a deputy 2 position, although it's what, $280 in a year? $260?
Plus overhead and things.
We're really looking about for this true fiscal year about $150,000 cost, maybe $130 because it's a half-year expenditure.
I know.
Am I looking at that the right way?
You aren't, because you can't just hire a deputy for half a year. You can't say, hey, come down for 6 months. And then
No, but
by the time he comes in to our
Yeah.
city, that's
Okay.
going to be at the
$150 grand. Okay.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Through the next fiscal year, he's going to be $150 grand. That's what the point is it's not July 1st. He's not going to be in the city of San Clemente. So maybe we just leave the direction that we have him for a half a year, right? We bring him in.
Let us work out the numbers.
Yeah, I was going to say
And-
let
and
them,
I-
because sometimes they have to, if they include in the budget, then it's part of the contract we do with the sheriff's department, and therefore anyway, let them do it.
The way this is a challenge because there is a perception problem. But the thing is, when you have $1.1 million in overtime that you're using to supplement service, you're really looking at about 3 to 4 additional quote-unquote deputies working in the city of San Clemente, or maybe not 3 additional that work in the city of San Clemente at a given time. And so there is a perception issue here, but ultimately if we approve that balance with initial, we're looking at 4 deputies, that will be, in the city of San Clemente that would be more than what we have as our current deputy, allotment. So there's there is an increase there that we're offering. Maybe not to what everyone wants, but it's something.
I would love to find out the imagination and the skill of our city management. I believe that James and Eric are above everyone as far as their abilities to be able to accomplish what we would accomplish with us.
Yeah,
with being able to.
He's using
get
a
it within
Jedi
the
mind
budget.
trick. It ain't gonna work.
So I know they're going to come back to us,
I got to buy a money printer.
giving us a way to get this done.
Here's the deal. I don't agree with your last sentiment there, Steve. So, we've
About
been
me
tasked
being smart?
with the difficult task of figuring out the budget process. Right? They've done their jobs. They've brought to us a balanced budget. Right? And so,
For direction of how to find.
I agree, but throwing it back on staff is not the appropriate way to handle it. I think if we set parameters this evening and say work within these parameters, I'm fine with that. But just to throw it back at staff and say do this, I am not comfortable doing that at all. Tim, I like your idea, and I want to talk this out. This is what I've been asking for 5 years. Is let's talk this out during the budget process. So I'm entertaining this tremendously. You start out by saying the 1.1 is 3 deputies, and then you change it to 4. I didn't follow you on that transition.
Because a deputy is what, 260, right? But in overtime, you're paying overtime, so it doesn't necessarily translate 1-to-1, right? Because you're paying a little bit more for that same time.
No.
Yeah, but you're not using them for the same amount of hours.
You get more deputy at overtime than you do at straight time.
We don't get hit with the administrative
The
overhead
administrative
charge
cost.
for the
Oh, I
overtime
see.
cost.
Okay, so well, then you can calculate 4 deputies that we're buying with our quote-unquote overtime,
4,
right?
okay.
But what I think, that we're setting, listen, James has proposed that we add a full-time deputy position in the crime prevention, and we reallocate overtime budget to do so. Maybe what we do is we look at mid-year, and if there's additional overtime budget, we use it to fund that second position for the rest of the year and offset the cost that way. I don't know. Do we anticipate blowing through our entire $1.2 million this year? Are we going to have the same policies we had last year that authorize that much overtime?
This last year was unique, and Mike came on board, and we realized that there was an issue going on with homelessness, and I directed him to burn through his overtime budget. My direction to him was
utilize his overtime budget.
Utilize his overtime. We budgeted for it, and I thought, let's use it. We actually get a bigger bang for our buck because it's probably closer to 2.5, 2 3/4 deputies that we get for that overtime amount versus hiring 2 straight deputies, because we don't have the pension costs, we don't have the benefit costs. Benefits add about 40% to the cost of an employee. So about 40% of that 260 is benefits. So we end up getting more for overtime than actually hiring deputies. And so it was something that Mike and I did. But as I said, I don't believe if we have a need, we should budget for the need. And so that's where I'm coming from as an administrator. But he would prefer to just use overtime and to use the staff he has. He thinks it's more effective. So, I'll defer to him.
And we're just budgeting it into overtime so that we can bring in the additional, have additional patrol at the times we want them. When we do overtime, we don't have to, they're not on a specific days to be there. So we can have more officers available at specific times when we need more by using the overtime versus having them on shifts, and they're in the shift, so we can't get more all bodies in one spot possibly as easily as if we do it, or as cheaply as if we do it through overtime for now. I agree we should go towards looking to budget for those additional positions, and I still think we need to do that going forward, but at least if we can maintain and have 4 deputies possibly with using overtime,
the equivalent of 4
the
deputies.
equivalent of 4 deputies using overtime, and putting them where we need them at the times we need them.
Just remember, though, that part of that overtime that's budgeted is for special events and other activities like Fiesta, 4th of July, Ocean Festival, stuff like that. So the overtime budget is built up to some extent with that,
Because of
and for different. So we aren't using the whole $1 million just for extra deputies. It's for special events. That's why my direction was for 2, because the other 500 is for those special events and everything.
So, yeah.
So, I don't know what to do, man.
So what is, okay, listen to this. What is wrong with just hiring the 2 full-time, knowing we aren't going to get them for 6 months, but we have all the overtime to use the half a year that they're not here?
Well,
Except I'm really sensitive to what Mike said. He actually said 1 deputy is not going to help him. If we just add 1, it's not going to do anything for him.
Here's the thing: we can sit up here and expound upon the seriousness of staffing levels at the police station below us, but the bottom line is the only expert in the room is the guy sitting in the back.
Yeah.
The guy sitting in the back said, "Don't touch my overtime budget. Leave it as is. Leave me everything as is."
And I agree with that. I do. And everything that Steve just said, I want to point out to you that this is what the council's been doing for the last couple of years. We've been funding positions with overtime, getting more out of the budget, because we try to squeeze out as much as we can, except this year everyone demanded more people. So I'm just pointing out what you just said is how we've been doing it. So you're preaching to the choir on this. This year, with everything that's going on and bringing on Mercy House and all of that and all the adjustments we're trying to make, I say just this year, we do it that way. We leave Mike alone. We do it that way. We see where the budget comes out with the 13 cities that are looking at the police budget, because we've really got to look at what the county's doing. Not just the sheriff's department, but the actual county. I mean, that's a big issue. So we do it this year this way because we have to. Because that's what that's what he needs to get it done. And I'm more willing to get the job done, and I don't care about, I'm worried about perception, but that's not how I vote.
Yeah.
So if that's what we have to do this year, but I don't want to see that going forward every year. I think we really do need to follow good budget practices.
I'd like to have a conversation with the chief about what this beach trail patrol looks like, what it's going to cost, and dig into it with Eric and Judy. The 4 of us dig into it and come back to you in 2 weeks or whenever we come back with the budget and have some better answers to you as to what it looks like and what the overtime's going to look like.
If I was to outline, the direction from the council right now is that we have no desire, obviously, I think you've heard it clearly, we're not going to go into the red on this question. So, that's an absolute. But I think we've stated that, we want to give the chief the tools, including the overtime, to manage this correctly, and also to retain, in my position, the crime prevention specialists that we have. And then, I do remain open to a mid-year adjustment. If there's an opportunity to add a deputy mid-year, and or at least maybe the start of next spring when they get ramped up for summer, so you start the process in January, and then, by the June or, May and June, they're up and going. Maybe there's a way we could do it mid-year so it won't have such a massive impact on the budget, but we can be prepared for the next summer. I'm curious with those types of creative approaches to this question, but I certainly am sympathetic. I love the way you did it, but I'm sympathetic to the chief's position on it. So I'd provide that direction to you to see if there's a way that we could engineer a solution here that we can try and get us to a point where we feel like we're getting the best answer.
We're also getting ready to go live with a poll, a survey, to see what the residents think of funding additional officers through some sort of tax or revenue generation. So we'll have that in the next 4 weeks, 6 weeks.
I think it's safe to say within the next 4 to 6 weeks. Yes.
Yeah. And then, if that's favorable, then something might be placed in the ballot for November. And then by the mid-year budget review, we'll have an idea of where we're at.
Well, and what I'm glad is that our mayor, although he didn't trust you and Eric to have the intelligence to pull the numbers together, but he did add, if you brought Mike in, that you would have the IQ to do it. So
no, come on now. The only thing I would also say to the council is the Mercy House allotment of $75,000. Potentially, the county may be approaching our city at some point for contributions towards a centralized shelter option, and what our contribution to that would be. And I would anticipate probably hearing some word back in the next 2 weeks on that. So I would say to city staff that although we have that $75,000 to Mercy House allocated, as well as, as part of the public safety discussion with these, with the budgeting and the overtime, that we may be presented with a proposal in a few weeks' time that may significantly change our budget, Everything changes with that, right? Because you have something happening in terms of that homeless question at a central level. So,
if the county pulls off what they're proposing, then we'll be in very good shape.
Yeah.
So
I'm pessimistically optimistic about it, though.
So I'm bringing that to the council's attention because things may change in a few weeks.
Okay. So I'm going to recommend that we go forward with Chief Peters' recommendation. Status quo.
We're going to tell him to meet.
Well, status quo, but give the latitude of staff as they come up with some.
Yeah, we don't have to.
Rabbit out of a hat.
There's nothing to vote on.
Yeah.
We're just giving it direction.
Well, we're not supporting this. In front of us.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the direction's clear. James, do you feel like you have a good handle on what
I'm
we're talking
good.
about?
I'm good.
Okay. Judy, do you have anything more for us to do today?
Careful. You've done enough.
I do just want to mention that the budget adoption is on June 12th. It's a different council meeting than our first Tuesday of the month because of elections. I believe that's what it is, Joanne. So June 12th, regular council meeting will be when our budget is adopted. That's it.
And close the public hearing.
Oh, I'm going to close the public hearing on that. Okay. So before you read the adjournment, there was just one cleanup item. Is the and I apologize because I'd met with the Skate Park Coalition extensively about this question. Is they were at one point proposing a school bowl as an addition to the skate park, and I think it was looking at about what, $250,000 project is what they were looking at. But they prefer that over the lighting solution, which is what we had budgeted for in years past, a $150,000 budget item that I believe is still on our CIP list. And we actually budgeted for it last year.
Wasn't it a matching fund?
It was it was 150 with a match. And so, it's obvious we got a thin budget and public safety priorities that are before us. But I do want to try and provide some direction and path to staff so that as we prepare for next year's budget that we fund that. And so I'd like to provide direction to Eric and James that we put together a plan on how to bring that back to the council.
I can speak a little bit to that. So we've met, me and my Samantha have met with the Skate Park Coalition recently, and we discussed what those steps look like from a school bowl creation. And one of the things we were able to determine from the city attorney is they could basically donate design services to the city. So in essence, they have a stakeholder who could basically draw up the design of a school bowl, so that wouldn't be a cost to the city. However, we've voiced some concerns that relates to the JPIA in terms of certain safety precautions that would be their safety measures. And so we'll continue that dialogue with them to develop a plan that works for the footprint there, and then obviously we'd come back to council to seek deliberation on funding and what the cost would be, because we're concerned that the 150 wouldn't be enough for a school bowl.
No, it's not. Yeah,
but we're going to continue that momentum with them.
And that's what I'm interested in. I know we're in this budget cycle, we're late, and that's my fault, but we also just don't have the flexibility this year. So my hope is we'll be presented with more options in the next year. So
understood.
Thank you, Eric.
Okay, move that we adjourn regular council meeting to be held on June 12th, 2018 in the council.
I'm just going to say the time of the closed session we'd like to change. The agenda says 5. We think we need 4.
We just got that.
Joanne, you can just start printing 4 on these instead of printing 5. Change the template. It's real easy.
Did you get the memo?
I did. So as I was saying, the council chamber is located at 100 Avenue, Presidio, San Clemente, California. Closed session will be considered at 4 p.m. The public business session will commence at 6 p.m.
Motion by Ham, Second by Schwartz. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes 4-0.